Chapter 1. The night everything changed. The dark mark burned against Severus Snape's forearm like molten iron, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ice-cold terror that had settled in his chest the moment he heard the whispered words passing through the Death Eater networks. The Potter boy is dead. The Dark Lord has fallen. Severus disapparated before the sentence was complete. The night air of Godric's Hollow hit him like a physical blow, thick with the acrid smell of dark magic and something else, something that made his stomach turn. Smoke. Burnt wood. Death. The cottage that had once been James and Lily's sanctuary stood before him, its upper floors partially collapsed, windows blown out, the front door hanging off its hinges like a broken jaw. For a moment, Severus couldn't move. His 21-year-old body felt ancient as he stood at the garden gate, black robes billowing in the October wind. The white picket fence that Lily had once mentioned in passing, how she'd painted it herself one weekend while James held baby Harry, was splintered and twisted, fragments scattered across the lawn like broken teeth. "No," he whispered, the word torn from his throat. "Please, no." But even as he spoke, he knew. The dark mark on his arm had gone cold and lifeless, something that had never happened before. If the Dark Lord had truly fallen tonight, if the prophecy had been fulfilled, then Lily... Severus forced his legs to move, each step toward the ruined cottage, feeling like he was walking toward his own execution. The front door was ajar, hanging at an impossible angle. He pushed it open with his wand, not trusting his shaking hands. James Potter lay sprawled in the hallway, his hazel eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. His wand was 3 feet away, as if he'd tried to draw it, but hadn't been fast enough. There was no mark on him. No blood. Just the terrible stillness that came with the killing curse. Severus stepped over the body without looking down, his heart hammering against his ribs. If James was here, then Lily would be... The stairs groaned under his weight as he climbed toward what he knew would be the nursery. Each step felt like a lifetime. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was shorter than it should have been. Part of the roof had caved in, leaving a gaping hole where stars flickered coldly overhead. The nursery door stood open. Severus stopped breathing. Lily Evans Potter lay crumpled beside an overturned crib. Her auburn hair spread across the floor like spilled silk. Her green eyes, those beautiful, brilliant green eyes that had haunted his dreams for years, were closed, but her face was peaceful, almost serene. One arm was stretched toward the crib, as if even in death she was trying to reach her son. Lily. The name fell from his lips like a prayer, like a curse. Severus dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her still form, not daring to touch. She looked so young, too young to be gone. They were both 21, barely adults themselves. And now... A soft whimper broke through his anguish. Severus's head snapped up. There, in the corner where the crib had been thrown by whatever force had torn through this room, sat a small figure. Baby Harry Potter, barely 15 months old, was very much alive. A thin line of blood trickled from a lightning bolt-shaped cut on his forehead, but his green eyes, Lily's eyes, were bright and aware as they fixed on Severus. "Mama?" Harry asked in a tiny, confused voice, reaching toward Lily's motionless form. The sound nearly broke Severus completely. He crawled forward, his expensive Death Eater robes tearing on the debris-covered floor, until he was close enough to see that Harry was unharmed, save for the cut on his forehead. The boy looked up at him with those impossibly green eyes, and Severus felt something crack open in his chest. "She's..." Severus's voice failed him. How did you explain death to a baby? How did you tell a child that the person who meant everything to them was gone forever? Harry reached up with chubby arms, making the universal baby gesture for "pick me up." Without thinking, Severus lifted him, and the boy settled against his chest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was warm and solid and alive, and he smelled like powder and innocence and everything Lily had died to protect. "Your mother loved you," Severus whispered into the baby's dark hair, "more than life itself, more than anything in this world." Harry's small hand fisted in Severus's robes, and he made a soft sound that might have been contentment or might have been grief. Severus looked down at Lily again, and the full weight of what had happened here crashed over him. The Dark Lord had come for this child, this tiny, defenseless baby, and Lily had died protecting him. James had died trying to give them time to escape. And somehow, impossibly, it was Voldemort who had fallen. A sound from outside made Severus freeze. Voices. Someone was coming. "Found the house!" The voice was deep and booming, unmistakably Hagrid. "Oh no, oh no, no, no." Dumbledore had sent Hagrid to collect Harry. Severus knew this as certainly as he knew his own name. The old man would have contingency plans, arrangements already made. Harry would be taken away, placed with relatives or guardians who would never know what Lily had sacrificed. He would grow up hearing stories about his famous parents, about the night he survived the killing curse, but he would never know how much his mother had loved him. He would become a symbol, a weapon, a tool to be used in whatever greater plan Dumbledore was weaving. Harry made a small sound and looked up at Severus with those green eyes, Lily's eyes, and something fundamental shifted in Severus's soul. This child was all that remained of Lily Evans. Her blood, her legacy, her final act of love made manifest. And Dumbledore wanted to hand him over to Muggles, who had despised Lily for her magic, who would probably despise Harry for the same reason. "I won't let them," Severus whispered fiercely. "I won't let them use you. I won't let them turn you into something she would hate." The voices were getting closer. Hagrid's heavy footsteps on the garden path, and now another voice. McGonagall, perhaps. They would be here in moments, and then it would be too late. Harry would be lost to the machinations of those who claimed to know what was best, and Severus would spend the rest of his life knowing he had failed Lily one final time. Unless... Severus looked down at Harry again, this tiny child who carried his mother's eyes and his father's untidy hair, who had somehow survived the unsurvivable, and was now looking at him with perfect trust. The baby's small hand was still fisted in his robes, as if he didn't want to let go. "Would you come with me?" Severus asked softly. "Would you let me keep you safe the way she would have wanted?" Harry gurgled and patted Severus's chest with his free hand, which Severus chose to interpret as agreement. The footsteps were at the front door now. There was no more time for hesitation, no more time for doubt. Severus wrapped his cloak around Harry, holding the child close to his chest, and disapparated, just as Hagrid's voice echoed through the ruined cottage. "Professor Dumbledore, the baby's not here." Severus materialized in the cramped front room of the house at Spinner's End, the house he had grown up in and sworn never to return to. The air was stale and cold, thick with the ghosts of his wretched childhood. Peeling wallpaper hung in strips, and dust motes danced in the weak light from the street lamp outside. It was a terrible place, a place of poverty and misery and broken dreams. But it was hidden. It was safe. And it was his. Harry began to cry, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence of the house like a blade. He was hungry, probably, and definitely confused. He didn't understand where his parents had gone, didn't understand why the nice man in black had brought him to this strange, dark place. But all he knew was that everything familiar was gone, and he was scared. Severus stood in the middle of his childhood prison, holding Lily's son, and realized that he had just committed the most impulsive act of his entire life. He had stolen Harry Potter. The boy who lived was supposed to be with Hagrid right now, on his way to whatever safe haven Dumbledore had arranged. Instead, he was here in Spinner's End, crying in the arms of a man who knew nothing about babies and everything about darkness. "What have I done?" Severus whispered. But even as the words left his lips, he knew he would do it again. Harry was safe. Harry was his now, for better or worse. And perhaps, if he was very careful and very lucky, he could give this child something he had never had himself, a childhood filled with love instead of fear. Harry's cries began to quiet as Severus rocked him gently, and those green eyes, Lily's eyes, gazed up at him with the absolute trust that only children possessed. In that moment, Severus Snape made a vow that would shape the rest of his life. He would be worthy of that trust, no matter what it cost him. Outside, the wizarding world was celebrating the fall of the Dark Lord. But inside the house, at Spinner's End, two souls who had lost everything began the long, difficult process of finding each other. Chapter 2. A House Unprepared for Life. Dawn was breaking over Spinner's End, casting sickly yellow light through the grimy windows of the house that Severus Snape had sworn never to return to. But here he was, pacing the cramped front room with a crying baby in his arms, wondering if he had made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. Harry had been crying for the better part of an hour, and nothing Severus did seemed to help. He had tried rocking, humming, walking, even gentle levitation charms, but the 15-month-old continued to wail with the impressive lung capacity that only distressed toddlers seemed to possess. The sound echoed off the peeling walls and broken plaster, making the already oppressive house feel like a torture chamber. "Please," Severus whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and grief. "Please, just what do you need?" Harry's only response was to cry harder, his small face red and blotchy with tears. He kept reaching past Severus, as if looking for someone else. Someone who would never come. The gesture broke Severus's heart all over again. Of course, Harry was crying. His parents were dead. His entire world had been torn away from him, and he had been taken by a virtual stranger to a place that smelled of mold and broken dreams. Any reasonable child would be inconsolable. Severus sank into the threadbare armchair, the same one his father had passed out in countless times, and tried to think. What did babies need? Food, certainly. Clean clothing. Warmth. Safety. Love. Though Severus wasn't entirely sure he knew how to provide that last one. When had Harry last eaten? It must have been before the attack. That was hours ago. No wonder the child was distressed. "Food," Severus said aloud, as if speaking the word might somehow conjure what he needed. "You need food." But what did 15-month-old children eat? Severus knew plenty about nutrition. He was a potions master, after all, and well versed in the properties of various ingredients. But baby food was an entirely different science. Did Harry still need milk? Soft foods? Could he chew properly at his age? Harry's cries intensified, and Severus made a decision. He would have to venture out, find supplies, and hope that no one recognized him or asked too many questions about the baby in his arms. But first, he needed to make this house marginally less horrible. "Just give me a few minutes," he told Harry, settling the child in the armchair with cushions arranged around him like a makeshift crib. "I promise I'll make this better." Harry continued to cry, but he seemed slightly less frantic now that he wasn't being jostled about. Severus drew his wand and began the most important transfiguration work of his life. "Reparo," he whispered, pointing at the nearest window. The cracked glass sealed itself, and he repeated the spell for every broken pane in the house. "Scourgify." Years of grime and neglect vanished from the walls, revealing faded but intact wallpaper underneath. "Impervious." Waterproofing charms to keep out the damp that had plagued this house for as long as he could remember. The heating system was beyond magical repair. It had been broken since Severus's childhood, but he could manage temperature-regulating charms. Warmth began to seep into the rooms for the first time in years. Harry's cries quieted slightly, and when Severus looked over, he saw that the baby had begun to nod off, exhausted by his own distress. Moving as quietly as possible, Severus continued his work, Sharp corners were rounded with transfiguration, loose floorboards were secured, and electrical sockets were covered. Every small object that could pose a choking hazard was vanished or moved to high shelves. In the space of an hour, he had transformed the house from a death trap into something approaching livable. But it still wasn't a home. It was just a slightly less dangerous prison. By the time Harry woke from his brief nap, Severus had managed to create a temporary nursery in what had once been his parents' bedroom. He had transfigured the old wardrobe into a crib, complete with soft blankets conjured from spare fabric. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep Harry safe and comfortable. The child's cries began again the moment he opened his green eyes, Lily's eyes, and Severus felt that familiar stab of grief and determination. He scooped Harry up, while noting that the boy's clothing was beginning to smell sour, and his nappy was definitely in need of changing. "Right," Severus said, settling Harry on the bed. "First lesson in childcare, cleanliness." It took 3 attempts, 2 different cleaning charms, and 1 unfortunate incident with a shrinking hex before Severus managed to get Harry properly clean and dressed in transfigured clothes that actually fit. Harry seemed to appreciate being clean and dry, his cries settling into sniffles and the occasional hiccup. "Better?" Severus asked, lifting the child. Harry looked up at him with those enormous green eyes and made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been hunger. "Food next, then." The kitchen was in an even worse state than the rest of the house, but Severus cleaned and repaired it with the efficiency of someone who had learned to be self-sufficient at a young age. The ancient cooker was coaxed back to life with a few well-placed heating charms, and the pipes coughed and groaned before producing actual clean water. But what to feed a 15-month-old child at 7 in the morning when the nearest shop wouldn't open for hours? Severus conjured what he hoped was appropriate baby porridge, testing it carefully before offering it to Harry. The child took one look at the grey, lumpy mess and turned his head away with a disgusted expression that reminded Severus painfully of Lily's reaction to poorly brewed potions. "Fair enough," Severus murmured. "Let me try again." The second attempt was smoother, sweeter, and actually resembled something edible. Harry was suspicious at first, but hunger eventually won out, and he allowed Severus to feed him small spoonfuls. It was messy, time-consuming, and incredibly nerve-wracking. Severus found himself holding his breath every time Harry swallowed, terrified that he had somehow poisoned Lily's son with inadequate baby food. But Harry ate, and colour returned to his pale cheeks, and when he was finished he made a sound that might have been contentment. "One crisis averted," Severus said softly, cleaning Harry's face with a damp cloth. "Only several thousand more to go." It was then that he heard the flutter of wings at the kitchen window, a barn owl perched on the sill, a rolled newspaper tied to its leg. Severus recognized the delivery owl from the Daily Prophet, though he had never subscribed to the paper himself. Someone in the village must have, and the owl had gotten confused by the magical signature emanating from the previously abandoned house. Severus paid the owl with a few knuts from his pocket and unrolled the paper with Harry balanced on his hip. The headline made his blood run cold. "Boy Who Lived Missing. Where is Harry Potter?" The article was sensational, even by Daily Prophet standards, full of wild speculation and barely concealed panic. Harry Potter, the child who had somehow survived the killing curse and defeated he who must not be named, had vanished from the scene of his parents' murder. Albus Dumbledore, recently confirmed as the child's magical guardian, had issued a statement expressing grave concern for Harry's whereabouts and calling for any information about the missing boy. The article mentioned that Harry had last been seen at his parents' house in Godric's Hollow, and that authorities were investigating all possibilities, including kidnapping by remaining Death Eater sympathizers. There was a photograph of Harry from several months ago, sitting in Lily's lap and laughing at something off-camera. The sight of Lily's face, animated and joyful and alive, made Severus's chest tighten with grief. A smaller sidebar article speculated about where Harry might have been placed for his own protection. The expert sources quoted in the piece seemed to assume that Dumbledore had hidden the child somewhere safe and was simply refusing to divulge the location to protect him from revenge seekers. If only they knew the truth. Or the boy who lived was currently sitting on the hip of a former Death Eater in the worst neighborhood in Cokeworth, eating conjured baby food and drooling on transfigured clothing. Harry made a soft sound and patted the newspaper with his small hand, right over Lily's photograph. "Mamma," he said clearly, his first real word since Severus had found him. The simple syllable hit Severus like a physical blow. Harry recognized his mother's picture. He understood, on some level, that she was gone, and he was calling for her. The trust in those green eyes as he looked up at Severus was heartbreaking. "Yes," Severus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's your mamma. She loved you very much." Harry patted the picture again, then looked at Severus with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a 15-month-old child, as if he understood exactly what had happened, exactly what Severus had risked to keep him safe. "Da?" Harry said experimentally, and Severus nearly dropped the newspaper. "No, I'm not. I'm Severus. Sev-er-us." The name felt strange on his tongue when spoken so gently. He had never heard it said without anger or contempt, or, in Lily's case, disappointed frustration. But Harry just smiled, the first smile Severus had seen from him, and repeated, "Sev." "Close enough," Severus managed, and found himself smiling back despite everything. The moment was interrupted by a sharp crack outside the house. Severus tensed, recognizing the sound of apparition, and quickly moved away from the window. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see two figures in aura robes standing at the end of the street, at their heads together in urgent conversation. They were searching. Of course they were searching. Harry Potter was the most famous child in the wizarding world, and his disappearance would have triggered the largest manhunt in decades. It was only a matter of time before they thought to check the homes of known Death Eaters, reformed or otherwise. Severus's heart raced as he watched the auras work their way down the street, performing detection charms on each house. They would be looking for signs of magical activity, traces of underage magic, anything that might indicate the presence of a powerful young wizard. The house at Spinner's End was practically radiating magic after all the repair work Severus had done. The moment they cast their detection charms, they would know someone was here. "Muffliato," Severus whispered, casting the most powerful silencing charm he knew around the entire house, then privacy charms, notice-me-not spells, and finally, the most complex ward he had ever attempted, a charm to disguise the magical signature of the house, making it appear as though the magic emanating from it was old, residual, nothing more than the fading traces of a witch who had once lived here decades ago. Harry seemed to sense the tension. He had gone very quiet in Severus's arms, his green eyes wide and watchful. It was as if he understood that they needed to hide, that danger was approaching. The auras reached the house next door. Severus could see the wands moving in precise patterns, could see the brief flare of detection charms. They found nothing of interest and moved on. Now they were at his front gate. Severus held his breath as the detection charms washed over his house. For a moment he was sure they would see through his hasty wards, sure they would knock down his door and drag Harry away to whatever fate Dumbledore had planned. But the charms held. The auras registered the old, faded magic and dismissed it as unimportant. They moved on to the next house. Severus didn't dare move until they had disapparated from the end of the street. Only then did he sink into the repaired armchair, Harry still in his arms, and allow himself to breathe. "That was close," he murmured to Harry, who had begun to gnaw on his own fist, a sure sign of hunger. "Too close." As if in response to Severus's words, Harry looked up at him and said, quite clearly, "Sev." And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, or the complete upheaval of both their lives, Severus found himself smiling again. Yes, he said softly. Sev, that's who I am now, I suppose. Outside, the wizarding world continued to search for their missing hero. But inside the house at Spinner's End, two outcasts were slowly learning to be a family. Chapter 3. Learning to be Human. 6 months had passed since the night Severus Snape had stolen Harry Potter from fate, and Spinner's End had transformed into something that almost resembled a home. The morning routine had become as precise as any potion recipe. Harry would wake at precisely 7 o'clock, not crying anymore, but calling out, "Sev! Sev!" in his clear, bright voice, until Severus appeared in the doorway of the makeshift nursery. Or the 22-year-old man who had once been the youngest Death Eater in Voldemort's inner circle now found himself making silly faces and speaking in the soft, patient tones he had never heard directed at himself as a child. "Good morning, Harry," Severus said, lifting the 21-month-old from his crib. The boy had grown considerably in the past months, his dark hair now long enough to stick up at impossible angles, so much like his father's that it occasionally gave Severus pause. But the eyes were still lilies, brilliant green and full of trust and mischief. "Sev," Harry announced happily, patting Severus's cheek with a sticky hand. "Breakfast." Breakfast had become Harry's favourite word after Sev, though he pronounced it with the determined enthusiasm of someone who had very strong opinions about food. Severus had learned, or through trial and considerable error, exactly what constituted acceptable breakfast fare for a discerning toddler: porridge with honey, but not too much, cut fruit, pieces no larger than his thumb, no smaller than a galleon, and milk served in the blue cup, never the red one. "Yes, breakfast," Severus agreed, settling Harry in the high chair he had transfigured from an old kitchen stool. "But first, what do we say about breakfast?" Harry screwed up his face in concentration, then recited carefully, "Breakfast is important for growing bodies and sharp minds." Very good. Severus found himself smiling more often these days, something that would have horrified his former associates. "And what makes breakfast most nutritious?" "Balance," Harry declared proudly. "Proteins and carbohydrates and—" He frowned, it struggling with the big word. "Vitamins," Severus supplied gently. "Vitamins," Harry repeated solemnly, as if committing the word to memory. It wasn't the sort of education most toddlers received, but Severus had never been conventional. When other children Harry's age were learning nursery rhymes about Humpty Dumpty, Harry was absorbing the basic principles of nutrition and magical theory. When they heard stories about 3 little pigs, Harry listened to carefully simplified explanations of how different ingredients worked together to create powerful effects. "Today," Severus said, preparing Harry's breakfast with movements that had become automatic, "shall we read about strengthening potions again, or would you like to learn about healing draughts?" "Healing," Harry said immediately, clapping his hands. "Or like when Sev made my knee better." The incident in question had occurred 2 weeks ago, when Harry had tumbled while chasing a conjured butterfly around the front room. His scraped knee had been bleeding, and before Severus could reach for a cloth, he had instinctively cast a simple healing charm. Harry had watched in fascination as the wound closed, and had spent the next hour pestering Severus to explain exactly how magic could mend hurt things. "Healing draughts it is," Severus agreed, settling beside Harry with a thick book that had once belonged to his mother. He had modified it extensively, adding pictures and simplifying the language, but the core information remained sound. "Now, what's the most important thing to remember about healing magic?" "Intent," Harry said, around a mouthful of porridge. "Magic knows what you want to do." "Precisely." Severus turned to a page illustrated with drawings of various healing herbs. "And what do we need before we can help others?" Harry thought carefully, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to understand," he said slowly. "Can't fix something if you don't know how it's broken." "Excellent." The pride in Severus's voice was unmistakable. Harry might only be 21 months old, but he had a remarkable ability to grasp complex concepts when they were presented properly. Now, this is chamomile. Can you say chamomile? Chamomile, Harry repeated dutifully, reaching out to touch the illustration. As his finger made contact with the page, the drawing shimmered and released the actual scent of chamomile flowers. Very good. And what does chamomile do? Makes calm, Harry said confidently. For when people are, anxious? Anxious, yes. Severus turned the page to show a drawing of willow bark. And this? But Harry wasn't looking at the new page. Instead, he was staring at his porridge bowl, which was slowly rising into the air. The spoon was stirring the contents by itself, creating perfect spirals in the oatmeal. Severus carefully reached over and guided the bowl back down to the table. This had been happening more frequently, moments when Harry's emotions or desires seemed to manifest directly through magic. It was remarkable for a child so young, but it also presented certain challenges. Harry, Severus said gently, what do we remember about magic? Harry looked up, his green eyes wide and slightly guilty. Magic is special, and we keep it inside when other people might see. That's right. Severus had struggled with how to explain the concept of magical secrecy to a toddler. The traditional approach, fear of persecution, threats from muggles, seemed inappropriate for someone so young. Instead, he had framed it as a game, a special secret that only Harry and Severus shared. Our magic is just for us, isn't it? Just for us, Harry agreed, nodding seriously. Then he smiled. But it's fun magic, right, Sev? Yes, Severus admitted, surprising himself. It is rather fun. After breakfast came the daily expedition to the back garden. Severus had spent considerable effort transforming the tiny, neglected space into something suitable for a curious toddler. The broken fence had been mended and raised, the weeds cleared away, and the soil enriched enough to support a small herb garden. Harry loved helping tend the plants, though his version of helping usually involved more dirt-eating than actual gardening. Today, Harry made a beeline for his favorite corner of the garden, where Severus had encouraged a patch of clover to grow. The toddler settled cross-legged among the small white flowers, immediately beginning his daily ritual of trying to find a four-leaf clover. Sev, Harry said, holding up a perfectly ordinary three-leaf specimen, is this lucky? All clover is lucky, Severus replied, settling on the garden bench with a book. But four-leaf clovers are especially so. Harry nodded solemnly and continued his search. Severus watched him out of the corner of his eye while pretending to read. Or these quiet moments in the garden had become precious to him. Time when Harry's boundless energy was focused and peaceful, when Severus could almost pretend they were a normal family in a normal home. Found one, Harry announced triumphantly, holding up what was indeed a four-leaf clover. Severus looked closer and felt his breath catch. It wasn't just a four-leaf clover, it was perfect, symmetrical, as if it had been designed by an artist, and there was a faint shimmer around the edges that suggested Harry's magic had been involved in its creation. That's very lucky indeed, Severus said carefully. Shall we preserve it? Harry nodded enthusiastically, and Severus performed a gentle stasis charm on the clover before helping Harry tuck it into his pocket. Another small magical incident to file away, but another reminder that Harry Potter was far from an ordinary child. The afternoon brought the weekly challenge that Severus dreaded most, shopping in Muggle Cokeworth. Harry's clothes were growing too small again, and despite Severus's skill with transfiguration, there were some things that required proper Muggle purchases. He had considered ordering everything by owl post, but that required addresses and paperwork that might draw unwanted attention. So every week, he bundled Harry into his pushchair and ventured into the world he had left behind. Cokeworth High Street was exactly as depressing as Severus remembered, a collection of shabby shops catering to people who couldn't afford to shop elsewhere. The other shoppers barely glanced at the pale young man pushing a dark-haired toddler, which was exactly how Severus preferred it. So, Sev, Harry said, pointing at the window display of a toy shop. "Why are those bears not moving?" It was a reasonable question from a child accustomed to magically animated toys. Severus had created an entire menagerie of creatures that danced and played and told stories. The static teddy bears in the shop window must seem deeply disappointing by comparison. "These are muggled toys," Severus explained quietly. "They don't have magic to make them move." "Oh." Harry considered this solemnly. "Can we give them magic?" "Not here," Severus said firmly. "Remember our rule about magic?" "Only at home," Harry recited dutifully, though he continued to stare longingly at the toy bears. The children's clothing shop was a trial of patience. Harry had very specific opinions about what constituted acceptable attire. Nothing scratchy, nothing too bright, and absolutely nothing with cartoon characters that didn't move. The shop assistant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed charmed by Harry's polite demeanor and extensive vocabulary. "He's very advanced for his age, isn't he?" she commented, as Harry carefully examined a jumper to ensure it met his standards. "He's curious about everything," Severus replied carefully. "And where's his mum, then? Working?" The question hit Severus like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think of anything but Lily lying still on the nursery floor. Harry, sensing the shift in mood, reached up and patted Severus's hand comfortingly. "She's not with us anymore," Severus managed to say. The shop assistant's face immediately softened with sympathy. "Oh, love, I'm so sorry. It must be hard. You're raising him on your own." "Some days are challenging," Severus admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Well, you're doing a wonderful job. He's a credit to you, he is." Harry chose that moment to hold up a small blue jumper and declare, "This one is soft and nice and the right color for growing minds." The shop assistant laughed delightedly. "Growing minds, is it? That's a new one." Severus felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had been too successful in teaching Harry his own unusual perspectives on child-rearing. "He picks up phrases," he muttered. "Smart as a whip, aren't you, sweetheart?" the woman said to Harry, who beamed and nodded enthusiastically. The walk home was peaceful. Harry dozed in his pushchair, exhausted by the excitement of the shopping expedition, while Severus pushed him through the familiar streets of his childhood. A few neighbors nodded politely. The strange young father and his well-behaved son had become accepted fixtures in the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson from number 12 had even taken to leaving small gifts on their doorstep: homemade biscuits, children's books she'd found at jumble sales, a tiny knitted hat when the weather turned cold. It was, Severus realized, the closest thing to community he had ever experienced. That evening, as Harry splashed happily in his bath, a proper bathtub now, conjured from an old wash basin and equipped with temperature-regulating charms, Severus reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a spy, a Death Eater, a man defined entirely by his loyalties and betrayals. Now he was someone who knew the exact temperature Harry preferred for his bath water, who could recite the tale of the 3 brothers from memory, who felt genuine panic when Harry's afternoon nap ran long. "Sev," Harry said, looking up from his collection of floating bath toys, "are you happy?" The question caught Severus off guard. "What makes you ask that?" Harry shrugged, a gesture that looked oddly adult on his small shoulders. "You smile now. At the beginning, you didn't smile. You noticed that?" "I notice everything," Harry said matter-of-factly. "You were sad when you found me, but now you're not sad all the time." Severus knelt beside the bathtub, looking into those perceptive green eyes. "I'm not sad when I'm with you," he said truthfully. Harry nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Good, because I'm not sad when I'm with you either." As Severus helped Harry into his pajamas and settled him into bed, he marveled at the simple truth his son, because that's what Harry was now, in every way that mattered, had spoken. The grief was still there, The loss of Lily still ached like a physical wound, but it no longer defined every moment of his existence. "Story time?" Harry asked hopefully, clutching his favourite stuffed dragon, a toy Severus had created after Harry had shown particular fascination with the illustration of a Hungarian horntail in one of his modified textbooks. "What would you like to hear about tonight?" "The Healing Draught Princess," Harry said immediately. This was their current favourite, a story Severus had improvised weeks ago about a princess who used her knowledge of healing potions to save her kingdom. It had become an elaborate, ongoing saga, with new adventures added each night. "Once upon a time," Severus began, settling in the chair beside Harry's bed, "in a land where magic and mundane lived side by side, there lived a princess who believed that knowledge was the most powerful magic of all." As Harry's breathing deepened and his grip on the stuffed dragon relaxed, Severus continued the story in increasingly quiet tones. These bedtime moments had become sacred to him. The soft weight of Harry's trust, the peaceful rhythm of his breathing, the knowledge that this extraordinary child was safe and loved and home. Outside, the streetlights of Spinner's End cast their familiar orange glow through the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. The sounds were the same as they had been throughout Severus's childhood, but everything else had changed. He was no longer the frightened, angry boy who had fled this house to join the Death Eaters. He was no longer the bitter spy who had returned to these streets broken by grief and guilt. He was Harry's Sev, and for the first time in his 22 years of life, that felt like enough. Chapter 4. The Boy Who Was Hidden. The morning of Harry's 3rd birthday dawned grey and drizzling, typical October weather for the industrial streets of Cokeworth. Severus had been awake since dawn, preparing what he hoped would be a memorable celebration for the little boy who had transformed his life so completely. 3 years. 3 years since that terrible night at Godric's Hollow, and Harry Potter had grown from a frightened, orphaned baby into a remarkable child who filled their small house with laughter and endless questions. Sev, is it birthday time?" Harry's voice carried down the stairs, high and excited and utterly joyful. "Happy birthday, Harry," Severus called back, unable to suppress his smile. At 23, he still sometimes marvelled at how natural this had become. The domestic rhythms, the parental affection, the way his entire world now revolved around one small person's happiness. Harry came thundering down the stairs, his dark hair even more unruly than usual, and his green eyes bright with anticipation. At 3 years and 4 months, he was tall for his age, all long limbs and boundless energy. He wore the blue jumper they had bought in Cokeworth months ago, now slightly too small but still his favourite because, as he had explained quite seriously, blue is the colour of thinking clearly. "Present time?" Harry asked hopefully, bouncing on his toes. "After breakfast," Severus said firmly. "What's the rule about celebrations?" Harry's face scrunched up in concentration, then brightened. "Celebrations should be, savoured slowly, like a perfectly brewed potion, because rushing makes things not work properly." "Precisely." Severus guided Harry to his high chair, now modified to accommodate the growing boy. "And what makes a celebration most meaningful?" "Gratitude," Harry said promptly. "Being thankful for good things and people who love you." These philosophical discussions had become a cornerstone of Harry's education. While other 3-year-olds were learning simple songs, Harry was absorbing complex concepts about life, magic, and human nature. Severus sometimes wondered if he was asking too much of such a young mind, but Harry seemed to thrive on intellectual challenge. "Today," Severus said, preparing Harry's birthday breakfast, pancakes shaped like stars, his current obsession, "we're going to try something new with your magical education." Harry's eyes widened. "Real magic? Not just the floating toys?" "Real magic," Severus confirmed. "You've been showing signs that your power is growing stronger. It's time we worked on control." This was an understatement. Harry's accidental magic had become increasingly dramatic over the past months. Just last week, he had become frustrated with a puzzle and somehow turned all the pieces into origami cranes that flew in perfect formation around the ceiling. The week before that, but a tantrum over bedtime had caused every clock in the house to chime midnight simultaneously. But it was yesterday's incident that had convinced Severus that formal magical education could no longer be delayed. Harry had been having what Severus generously termed a moment of strong emotions about finishing his porridge, a 3-year-old's passionate declaration that oatmeal was yucky and he didn't want it in his tummy. In the middle of his tearful protest, the porridge had suddenly transformed into a dozen brilliant orange butterflies that fluttered around the kitchen before vanishing in sparkles of light. The magic itself wasn't particularly concerning. Transfiguration was advanced, but accidental magic in magical children could manifest in unexpected ways. What worried Severus was the precision of it. The butterflies had been perfect, anatomically correct, beautifully colored. That level of detail suggested power and control that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "First," Severus said, setting the star-shaped pancakes in front of Harry, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday." Harry's face fell slightly. "I made the porridge into butterflies," he said in a small voice. "Was that bad?" "Not bad," Severus assured him quickly. "Unexpected. Magic like that usually doesn't happen until children are much older. Can you tell me what you were feeling right before it happened?" Harry considered this seriously, chewing a bite of pancake while he thought. "I was angry," he said finally. "But not mean angry. More like frustrated angry. Like when you want something to be different, but you can't make it different with just wanting." The observation was remarkably sophisticated for a 3-year-old, and it made Severus's chest tighten with pride and concern in equal measure. Harry's emotional intelligence was as advanced as his magical abilities, which created a dangerous combination. "That's exactly right," Severus said. "And when magical people feel very strong emotions, sometimes our magic responds whether we want it to or not. That's why we need to learn control. Like you control your potions, very much like that. Magic requires precision, patience, and purpose. Just like brewing." Harry nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can I learn to make butterflies on purpose?" "Eventually," Severus promised. "But first, we learn to keep the magic inside until we decide to let it out." After breakfast, they settled in the front room, which Severus had carefully prepared for Harry's first formal magical lesson. All the furniture had been moved against the walls, and the floor was covered with soft cushions. Protective charms hummed quietly in the air, nothing that would prevent Harry from using magic, but spells that would contain any accidental outbursts. "Magic," Severus began, settling cross-legged across from Harry, "starts in here." He placed a hand over his heart. "It's connected to our emotions, our intentions, our deepest desires. When we're very young, it responds to those feelings without us having to think about it." Harry mirrored Severus's position, sitting with impressive focus for a 3-year-old. "Like when I was sad about the bird with the hurt wing, and then it got better?" Severus paused. He had found Harry in the garden 3 weeks ago, crying over a robin with a broken wing. By the time Severus had reached him, the bird was whole and healthy, hopping around Harry's feet as if nothing had happened. Severus had assumed he had simply misassessed the bird's injury, but now— "Yes," he said carefully, "like that. You wanted the bird to be well, and your magic responded to that desire. I can heal things?" Harry's voice was filled with wonder. "It appears you might have a gift for it." Severus chose his words carefully. Healing magic was rare, difficult, and usually required years of study. For a 3-year-old to manifest it instinctively was almost unheard of. But gifts need to be trained and controlled, just like any other skill. They spent the next hour working on basic magical meditation, techniques for recognizing the feeling of magic stirring inside. methods for calming strong emotions, simple exercises for containing magical outbursts. Harry approached it with the same serious attention he brought to his potions lessons, asking thoughtful questions and practicing each technique with determined focus. "Now," Severus said when they took a break, "I think it's time for your birthday present." Harry's eyes lit up, but he waited patiently as Severus retrieved a wrapped package from behind the sofa. Inside was something Severus had been working on for months, a book of magical theory written specifically for a young child, with moving illustrations and interactive elements that would respond to Harry's touch. "And it's beautiful," Harry whispered, tracing his finger along the cover. The title, Magic for Young Minds, shimmered with silver letters that rearranged themselves into different languages as he watched. "Thank you, Sev. There's something else." Severus pulled out a smaller package, his expression growing more serious. "This is very important, Harry. Do you remember what we've talked about regarding your identity?" Harry nodded. They had practiced this conversation many times. If anyone asked, Harry's name was Harry Snape, and Severus was his father. It was a necessary deception, but one that had become increasingly natural over the years. Inside the second package were official-looking documents, birth certificate, medical records, school enrollment papers. To any Muggle authority, Harry Snape was the legitimate son of Severus Snape, born at home and raised quietly in Cokeworth. "These make it official in the Muggle world," Severus explained. "If anyone ever asks questions about who you are or where you belong, these papers will prove that you belong with me." Harry studied the documents with the serious attention of someone much older. "Because some people might try to take me away." "Because," Severus said carefully, "there are people who think they know what's best for you without understanding what you need. These papers protect our family." The word family still felt strange on Severus's tongue, but it was what they were now. Unconventional, hidden, but undeniably real. That afternoon, as Harry napped peacefully in his bed, clutching his new book, Severus sat in the kitchen, reading the latest letter from Hogwarts. It was the 7th such letter in 3 years, each one more urgent than the last. Albus Dumbledore was becoming increasingly insistent that Severus take up his promised position as potions master. The most recent letter hinted that continued absence might be seen as a breach of their agreement. Severus set the letter aside with the others. Let Dumbledore wonder. Let the wizarding world assume that Severus Snape had vanished entirely from their society. He had found something more important than career advancement or old loyalties. He had found purpose. A soft sound from the garden drew his attention. Harry was awake from his nap and had wandered outside, still groggy with sleep. Severus watched through the window as the boy settled beside the small herb garden, apparently talking to someone. Curious, Severus stepped outside and froze. Harry was having an animated conversation with a small grass snake that had emerged from the herb garden. But it wasn't the conversation itself that made Severus's blood run cold. It was the sound of Harry's voice. Low, sibilant, unmistakably the hissing speech of Parseltuck. "And then Sev made pancakes shaped like stars," Harry was saying, his words perfectly clear to Severus, despite being spoken in the language of serpents. "Do you like pancakes? I think you would like them if you could try them, but I guess snakes eat different things." The snake, a harmless garden variety, was responding with what appeared to be genuine interest, raising its head and flicking its tongue in what looked remarkably like active listening. Severus felt the world tilt sideways. Parseltongue was an extraordinarily rare gift, associated with dark magic and, most significantly, with Salazar Slytherin's bloodline. More relevantly, it was known to be one of the abilities possessed by Lord Voldemort. The connection was impossible to ignore. Harry Potter, the boy who had somehow survived the killing curse, spoke the same rare magical language as the Dark Lord who had tried to murder him. The implications were staggering and terrifying. "Harry," Severus called softly, not wanting to startle either the child or the snake. Harry looked up, his face brightening. "Sev, come meet my friend. His name is—" He made a sound that was pure snake speech, untranslatable to human ears. "He says the mint plants taste very good, and he's grateful we planted them." "I see." Severus approached slowly, his mind racing. "Harry, do you realize you're speaking differently to your friend than you speak to me?" Harry tilted his head, considering. "Am I? It just feels like talking normally. But with him, the words come out different." He looked between Severus and the snake with growing concern. "Is it wrong? Should I not talk to him?" The innocence in the question nearly broke Severus's heart. Here was this extraordinary child, displaying abilities that could mark him as dangerous to some, worried only that he might have disappointed his guardian. "It's not wrong," Severus said firmly. "It's unusual. Very few people can speak with serpents the way you do. It's called parseltongue, and it's a very rare, magical gift." "Is it why some people might want to take me away?" Harry asked, with the intuitive understanding that Severus had come to expect from him. "It might be part of it," Severus admitted. There was no point in lying. Harry was too perceptive, too intelligent. He would figure out the truth eventually, and Severus would rather it came from him. "Some people fear what they don't understand. Your ability to speak with serpents is connected to complicated magical history." Harry said goodbye to his snake friend in gentle parseltongue, then walked over to slip his hand into Severus's. "But you're not afraid of it?" Severus looked down at this remarkable child, orphaned, gifted, probably carrying pieces of the very monster who had killed his parents, and still capable of such trust and love. The connection to Voldemort was concerning, potentially dangerous, but it didn't change the fundamental truth that had guided Severus for 3 years. This was Harry. His Harry. The boy who made star-shaped pancakes taste better than any feast, who healed injured birds with instinctive compassion, who fell asleep clutching books about magical theory, and woke up worried about disappointing the man who loved him. Whatever darkness might be lurking in Harry's magical heritage, it paled beside the light of who he was becoming. "No," Severus said firmly, squeezing Harry's small hand. "I'm not afraid. You are exactly who you're meant to be, and nothing will ever change that." Harry beamed and swung their joined hands as they walked back to the house. "Can we have birthday cake now?" "I think," Severus said, now surprising himself with the lightness in his voice, "that would be perfect." That evening, as Harry slept peacefully surrounded by his birthday presents, Severus sat in the kitchen composing his response to Hogwarts. It was brief, polite, and absolute. He would not be taking the potions master position, now or ever. His teaching days, if they came at all, would be on his own terms and in his own time. Outside, the street lamps of Spinner's End flickered in the autumn wind. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds continued building a family that existed outside the expectations of both magical and muggle worlds. And in the garden, a small grass snake settled contentedly among the mint plants, still thinking about the strange but pleasant conversation it had shared with the unusual little human who spoke its language with such natural fluency. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. 5 years old, and Harry Potter had become a philosopher. Severus discovered this on a crisp November morning in 1985, when he found Harry perched on the window seat of their front room, nose pressed against the glass, watching a group of children walk past on their way to the local primary school. Their bright chatter carried through the thin walls of Spinner's End, all excited voices and scraped knees, and the kind of careless joy that seemed to radiate from children who had never known real loss. "Sev," Harry said without turning around, his breath fogging the window, "why do those children get to walk together like that?" Severus, though now 25 and well-versed in the art of Harry's increasingly complex questions, set down his morning tea and approached carefully. "What do you mean?" "They laugh at the same things," Harry observed, tracing patterns in his breath fog. "And they know each other's names, and when one of them drops something, the others help pick it up without being asked." He turned to look at Severus with those impossibly green eyes that still stopped Severus's heart with their resemblance to Lily. "They're like a group that belongs together." "They're friends," Severus said gently. "Children who enjoy spending time together." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "I know what friends are. You've read me stories about friends. But I was wondering, why don't I have any?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Or Severus had been dreading this moment for months, watching Harry grow more observant, more questioning about the boundaries of their carefully constructed world. At 5, Harry's intelligence was remarkable. He could read advanced texts, understand complex magical theory, and engage in philosophical discussions that would challenge adults. But emotionally, he was still a child who wanted what all children wanted: companions, playmates, the simple joy of shared experience. "You have me," Severus said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't enough anymore. "I know," Harry said seriously. "And I love you very much, Sev. You're the most important person in my whole world. But—" he paused, clearly trying to find the right words. "Sometimes I think it might be nice to have someone who's the same size as me. Someone who likes the same games and doesn't know so many big words." Severus's chest tightened. Harry had never complained about their isolation before, had seemed content with his books and magical lessons and the small world they had built together. But children grew, and with growth came new needs, new desires that even the most devoted guardian couldn't fulfill alone. "What if," Severus said carefully, "we tried visiting the playground this afternoon, just to watch at first? Would you like that?" Harry's face lit up with such pure delight that Severus felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. "Really? I could see other children playing? Really? But—" Severus held up a warning finger. "We would need to be very careful about our special abilities. Do you remember the rules about magic around other people?" Harry's expression grew solemn. "Magic stays inside unless we're at home and safe. No floating things, no fixing broken things, no talking to animals where others can see. And if something magical happens by accident, I should come find you right away." "Perfect." Severus had been drilling these rules into Harry since his 3rd birthday, knowing that this day would eventually come. "And what do we do if anyone asks personal questions?" "We keep our answers simple and don't give away important information. My name is Harry Snape, you're my papa, and we live quietly because you work from home." Harry had the response memorized, but Severus could see the slight confusion in his eyes. The lies necessary for their safety were becoming harder to explain as Harry grew older and more perceptive. That afternoon, Severus found himself walking to the local playground with Harry's small hand tucked trustingly in his own. The park was typical for the area: a few swings, a slide that had seen better days, and a small climbing frame surrounded by patchy grass and the ever-present backdrop of Cokeworth's industrial skyline. There were 6 children there, ranging in age from about 4 to 8, all bundled in winter coats and engaged in the timeless activities of childhood, swinging, chasing, building elaborate pretend worlds out of absolutely nothing. Harry stood at the edge of the playground, taking it all in with the focused attention he usually reserved for magical theory. Severus could practically see him cataloguing every interaction, every social dynamic, trying to understand the unspoken rules of childhood friendship. Could I go closer?" Harry asked quietly. Severus's protective instincts warred with his desire to give Harry what he needed. "Stay where I can see you," he said finally. "And remember, magic stays inside," Harry finished with a small smile. "I'll be careful, I promise." Watching Harry approach the other children, was like watching a young anthropologist encountering a new culture. He hung back at first, observing their games with scientific intensity. When a little girl with pigtails noticed him and waved, Harry waved back with careful politeness. When a boy about his own age invited him to help build a fort out of fallen leaves, Harry looked back at Severus for permission before joining in. What struck Severus most was Harry's immediate empathy. When a younger child fell and scraped his knee, Harry was the first to offer comfort, producing a handkerchief from his pocket and speaking in the same gentle tones Severus used when Harry was upset. When the children argued over playground rules, Harry listened to all sides before suggesting compromises that satisfied everyone. But there were moments that made Severus's heart clench with worry. Harry's vocabulary was far advanced for his age, and several times Severus saw other children look confused when Harry used words like analyze or theoretically in casual conversation. When one child complained about a broken toy, Harry's first instinct was clearly to fix it magically. Severus could see the effort it took for the boy to remember the rules and simply offer sympathy instead. "Your little one's got lovely manners," said a woman who had settled on the bench beside Severus, watching her own daughter play. "Very thoughtful. Doesn't see that often these days." "Thank you," Severus replied carefully. "He's observant. Homeschooled, is he? Haven't seen him at the local primary." Severus felt his shoulders tense. This was exactly the kind of conversation he'd hoped to avoid. "We handle his education privately." The woman nodded approvingly. "Probably for the best, the state of schools these days. Though he'll need to socialize eventually, won't he? Bright as he seems, he'll need friends his own age." Before Severus could respond, a commotion near the slide drew their attention. One of the older boys had taken a tumble and was crying loudly, clutching his arm. The other children gathered around in the way children do, torn between concern and fascination. Harry appeared at the injured boy's side almost instantly, his face serious and focused. Severus watched in horror as Harry reached toward the boy's arm, clearly intending to heal the injury with the same instinctive magic he'd used on the garden birds. "Harry!" Severus called sharply, rising from the bench. Harry's hand stopped inches from the other boy's arm, and he looked up at Severus with wide eyes. For a moment, Severus could see the internal struggle playing out on his son's face, the desperate desire to help warring with the rules about keeping magic hidden. "It's okay," Harry said instead, his voice gentle and mature beyond his years. "My papa knows about hurt arms. Papa, can you help Tommy?" Severus approached quickly, assessing the situation. The boy, Tommy, apparently, had a minor sprain, nothing serious but undoubtedly painful for a 6-year-old. Severus knelt beside him, using mundane first aid techniques he'd learned during his Death Eater years. "It's just twisted," he told Tommy's worried mother, who had rushed over. "Rest and ice should sort it right out." As the excitement died down and the injured boy was led away by his mother, Harry stayed close to Severus's side, unusually quiet. The other children resumed their play, but Harry seemed to have lost interest. "Ready to go home?" Severus asked softly. Harry nodded, taking Severus's hand as they walked back through the streets of Cokeworth. They were halfway home when Harry finally spoke. "It's hard," he said simply. "What's hard?" "Wanting to help but not being allowed to. Tommy's arm really hurt, and I could have made it better, but—" Harry shrugged, a gesture that looked far too world-weary on such young shoulders. "I know," Severus said, stopping to crouch down so he could look Harry in the eyes. "It's one of the most difficult things about having magical abilities, knowing you could help, but having to stay hidden for everyone's safety." "Will it always be like this?" Harry asked. "Will I always have to pretend to be something I'm not?" The question cut through Severus like a blade. How did you explain to a 5-year-old that the world was full of people who would either fear him or use him? How did you justify isolation without crushing a child's natural desire for connection? "I hope not," Severus said honestly. "When you're older, when you're stronger and more in control of your abilities, things might be different. But for now, this is how we keep our family safe." Harry nodded solemnly, accepting the explanation with the trust that never failed to humble Severus. The playground visits became a regular occurrence over the following weeks, carefully timed and strictly supervised. Harry gradually grew more comfortable with the other children, though Severus could see the constant effort it took for him to monitor his words and suppress his magical instincts. The boy was developing an elaborate internal filtering system, constantly translating his thoughts into concepts other 5-year-olds could understand. It was exhausting to watch. The situation became more complicated in December, when Severus found an official letter from the local education authority waiting in their post. Harry Potter Snape, according to his forged documents, was now of compulsory school age and must be enrolled in formal education by January. Severus dealt with the letter the same way he'd handled similar bureaucratic intrusions: a carefully placed confundus charm on the clerk, some subtle modifications to the school enrollment database, and suddenly there was no record that Harry Snape had ever been flagged for missing school. It was a temporary solution, but it bought them time. "Sev," Harry said one evening, as Severus read to him before bed, "why don't you ever talk about having friends when you were little?" The question caught Severus off guard. Harry's bedtime inquiries had grown increasingly perceptive, often touching on topics that Severus preferred not to examine too closely. "What makes you ask that?" Harry shifted in his bed, clutching the stuffed dragon that had been his companion for years. "The other children at the playground, they talk about their parents' friends, about visits and parties and people their mums and papas knew when they were young. But you never mention anyone like that." Severus set the book aside, buying time to formulate an answer that would be honest without being devastating. "How did you explain to a child that you'd never really had friends, that your childhood had been marked by poverty, neglect, and the kind of isolation that bred desperate hunger for acceptance? That the closest thing you'd had to friendship had been with his mother, and that relationship had been destroyed by your own choices and allegiances?" "I was a very serious child," Severus said finally. "I spent most of my time studying, reading, learning about magic and potions. I didn't have much time for friendships." "Like me?" Harry asked quietly. The parallel hit Severus like a physical blow. "No," he said firmly. "Not like you. You're isolated because I'm protecting you. I was isolated because—" He paused, struggling for words that wouldn't traumatize a 5-year-old. "Because I didn't know how to be the kind of person others wanted to be around." Harry considered this with typical seriousness. "But I like being around you. You're kind and smart, and you make me feel safe. If you were a child now, I would want to be your friend." Severus felt his throat constrict with emotion. "Why, you would?" "Of course," Harry said matter-of-factly. "You're the best person I know." That night, after Harry had fallen asleep, Severus sat in his kitchen, staring at a letter he'd written, but couldn't bring himself to send. It was addressed to Xenophilius Lovegood, the eccentric wizard who had visited them years ago, and expressed sympathy for their situation. In the letter, Severus had tentatively inquired about other magical families who might be living in similar isolation, children who might benefit from careful, supervised socialization. But sending the letter would mean expanding their circle of trust, creating new vulnerabilities, and potentially exposing Harry to dangers that Severus couldn't control. The protective instincts that had kept them safe for 5 years warred with the growing certainty that Harry needed more than Severus alone could provide. A soft sound from upstairs made him look up. Harry had gotten out of bed and was padding downstairs in his pajamas, clutching his dragon. "Can't sleep?" Severus asked gently. Harry shook his head and climbed into Severus's lap, something he'd been doing less frequently as he grew older and more independent. "I had a thinking dream," he said. "What kind of thinking dream?" "About the playground, about the other children." Harry was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Sev, do you think there are other children like me? Or children who have magic but have to keep it secret? The question was so close to Severus's own thoughts that he wondered if Harry had somehow picked up on his mental turmoil. "There might be," he said carefully. "I think it would be nice to meet one," Harry said wistfully. "Someone who understood about having to be careful with words and not fixing things when they're broken. Someone who wouldn't think I was strange for knowing about potions and healing magic." Severus looked down at the letter on the table, then at the remarkable child in his arms, brilliant, compassionate, increasingly isolated, despite Severus's best efforts to provide a normal childhood. "What if," Severus said slowly, "we could find a way to meet other magical children? Very carefully, very safely." Harry's eyes widened with hope. "Do you think we could?" "I think," Severus said, reaching for the letter, "it might be time to take a very small risk." He sealed the letter before he could change his mind, knowing that he was taking the first step toward expanding their carefully protected world. It was terrifying and necessary and probably overdue. Outside, the street lamps of Spinner's End flickered in the winter wind. Inside, a man who had spent his entire life guarding his heart was learning that sometimes love meant accepting vulnerability, that protecting a child might require exposing them to carefully chosen dangers. And upstairs, a 5-year-old boy dreamed of friends who might understand the weight of secrets and the complexity of magic, never knowing that his simple question had just changed the entire trajectory of their hidden life. Chapter 6. The First Crack. The friendship began, as many childhood friendships do, with a shared moment of loneliness. Harry had been 7 years old for 3 months, and his weekly visits to the Cokeworth playground had become as routine as his magical lessons and potions theory. But on this particular grey February afternoon in 1987, something was different. While the other children clustered together in their familiar groups, there was one girl sitting alone on the edge of the sandbox, methodically building elaborate castles with the focused intensity of someone who had learned to entertain herself. She was perhaps 6 years old, with fine brown hair that kept escaping from a crooked ponytail and a serious expression that reminded Harry of his own reflection when he was deep in thought. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, and she wore thick glasses that magnified her dark eyes to an almost owlish size. "That's a very precise castle," Harry observed, settling beside her in the sand. At 7, his vocabulary was still occasionally problematic in social situations, but something about this girl suggested she might not mind bigger words. She looked up at him with surprise and a hint of wariness. "Thank you. I'm trying to make it structurally sound. The other children just pile sand up and then wonder why it falls down." Harry's face lit up. Here was someone who thought about the engineering principles behind sand architecture. "You need proper foundation work," he agreed earnestly, "and the correct moisture content in your building material. Too dry and it won't hold, or too wet and it lacks stability." The girl stared at him for a moment, then broke into the first genuine smile Harry had seen from her. "Exactly. No one else understands that. I'm Sarah. Harry, would you like help with your castle? I have some theories about optimal wall thickness." And just like that, Harry Potter found his first real friend. Sarah Mitchell, as Harry learned over the following weeks, was the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She was left in the care of various neighbours after school, which explained her frequent presence at the playground when other children had gone home to tea and homework. Like Harry, she was intellectually advanced for her age, though her knowledge came from voracious reading rather than specialised magical education. "My mum says I think too much," Sarah confided to Harry one afternoon as they built an elaborate snow fort. "She says it's not healthy for a child to be so serious all the time." "Sev says thinking is the most important thing we can do," Harry replied, carefully packing snow to reinforce their fort's eastern wall. "He says people who don't think enough make dangerous mistakes." "Sev is your father?" Harry nodded automatically, the lie so well practiced it felt like truth. "He's very smart. He knows about chemistry and lots of things." What Harry didn't tell Sarah was how much their friendship meant to him. For the first time in his 7 years of life, he had someone who didn't seem bothered by his extensive vocabulary or his tendency to analyze everything from the physics of playground equipment to the social dynamics of their playmates. Sarah asked thoughtful questions, listened to his explanations, and offered insights that often surprised him with their sophistication. Severus, now 27 and deeply protective of their carefully constructed world, watched this developing friendship with mixed feelings. On one hand, he could see how much joy Sarah brought to Harry's life. The boy came home from each playground visit, animated and happy, eager to share stories about his friend and the games they'd invented together. On the other hand, every friendship created vulnerabilities. Sarah asked questions, innocent ones, but questions nonetheless. Why didn't Harry go to the local school? Why did his father always watch from such a distance? Why did Harry sometimes use words like theoretical and methodology in casual conversation? "She's very nice," Harry told Severus one evening as they prepared dinner together. At 7, Harry was an accomplished assistant cook, able to measure ingredients precisely and understand the chemical reactions that made bread rise and sauces thicken. "She wants to be a scientist when she grows up, or maybe an engineer. She hasn't decided which yet." "That's very ambitious," Severus said carefully. "What does she think about your interests?" "She likes hearing about chemistry," Harry said, stirring the soup with careful attention to creating proper convection currents. "I told her about how different temperatures affect molecular behavior, and she thought it was fascinating. She's going to ask her mum to get her a book about it." Severus felt his stomach tighten. Harry's casual discussions of advanced scientific concepts were another potential exposure risk. How long before Sarah's questions led to conversations with her mother or teachers or other adults who might wonder how a 7-year-old had acquired such specialized knowledge? But watching Harry's face as he talked about his friend, seeing the genuine happiness that their friendship brought him, Severus found himself unable to discourage the relationship. Harry had been isolated for so long, had sacrificed so much for their safety. Surely one carefully monitored friendship couldn't be too dangerous. It was a cold Tuesday in March when everything went wrong. Harry had been playing with Sarah on the new climbing frame that the council had installed, a tall, complex structure of metal bars and platforms that challenged even the most adventurous children. Sarah, being smaller and less physically coordinated than Harry, had been cautious about climbing too high. But something about that day, perhaps the way the other children were laughing and calling out challenges, perhaps simple childhood bravado, made her decide to attempt the highest platform. Harry watched from below, ready to offer encouragement and advice about hand placement and weight distribution. Sarah climbed methodically, her face set with determination behind her thick glasses. She made it to the top platform successfully, beaming with pride at her accomplishment. The trouble started when she began her descent. Harry saw it happening in slow motion. Sarah's foot slipping on a wet metal bar, her hands losing their grip, her small body beginning to fall backward from a height that would certainly result in serious injury. In that split second, Harry didn't think about magical secrecy or the need for caution. He didn't consider the other children watching or the potential consequences of exposure. All he thought about was saving his friend. The magic erupted from him with desperate intensity. Sarah's falling body suddenly slowed, then stopped entirely, suspended in mid-air 3 feet above the ground. She hung there for several heartbeats, surrounded by a faint shimmer that looked like heat distortion, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. The other children stopped playing. Parents looked up from their conversations. Everyone in the playground was staring at the impossible sight of a 6-year-old girl floating in the air, defying every law of physics they understood. "What?" Sarah began, her voice high and frightened. Harry, realizing what he'd done, felt panic flood through him. With effort that made his head spin, he lowered Sarah gently to the ground and released the magic. She landed softly on her feet, unharmed but clearly shaken. "Did you see?" one child began. "She was flying!" another shouted. "How did she do that?" The adults were moving now, rushing toward the climbing frame with expressions of concern and confusion. Harry could see Severus approaching from his usual bench, his face pale with alarm. I don't understand," Sarah stammered, looking between Harry and the gathering crowd. "I was falling and then... What happened? How did I—" "Magic," whispered a younger child, and the word sent a ripple of nervous laughter through the group. "Don't be silly," said an older girl. "There's no such thing as magic." But several people had seen it clearly. Sarah falling, then not falling, hanging in the air as if held by invisible hands. Phones were coming out of pockets now, as adults tried to understand what they'd witnessed. Severus reached Harry's side just as the first parent began asking pointed questions about what had happened. Harry looked up at him with panic-stricken green eyes, clearly terrified that he'd ruined everything, that his moment of instinctive magic had destroyed their carefully protected life. "Everyone step back, please," Severus said with quiet authority, his wand hidden in his sleeve. "Give the children some space to breathe." What happened next was the most complex piece of magic Severus had ever attempted. Multiple memory modifications, performed simultaneously on over a dozen people, each one carefully tailored to create a coherent alternative memory that would explain what they thought they'd seen. For the adults, he implanted memories of Sarah catching herself on a lower bar, of what had looked like falling being actually a controlled dismount. For the younger children, he simply erased the last few minutes entirely, replacing them with mundane memories of normal playground activities. But Sarah was different. Whether it was her intellectual nature, her natural skepticism, or simply random resistance to the memory charm, fragments of the true memory remained. As Severus worked to modify her recollections, he could sense pieces of the experience lodging themselves in corners of her mind that his magic couldn't quite reach. When it was over, the playground had returned to normal activity. Parents went back to their conversations, children resumed their games, and life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But Sarah stood beside the climbing frame, her face scrunched up in confusion, clearly aware that something was wrong, even if she couldn't articulate what. Did I fall?" she asked Harry hesitantly. "I remember starting to fall, but then—" She shook her head, frustrated. "It's all fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream." "You caught yourself," Harry said quietly, the lie tasting bitter in his mouth. "You're very athletic." But Sarah was too smart to accept such an obvious contradiction of her memories. "That doesn't feel right," she said. "I remember being scared, and then something else, something impossible." Over the following days, the situation only grew worse. Sarah's fragmented memories led to persistent questions that Harry found increasingly difficult to answer. She would stop mid-sentence during conversations, looking confused, as if trying to grasp something that kept slipping away. She began asking strange questions about Harry's abilities, about whether he'd ever seen anything that couldn't be explained. "My mum thinks I'm having nightmares," Sarah told Harry during what would turn out to be their last playground meeting. "I keep dreaming about flying, but not in a plane or anything, just floating in the air. She says it's because I watch too much television." Harry felt sick with guilt. His magic, his desperate attempt to save his friend, had broken something in Sarah's mind. The memory charm had created gaps and inconsistencies that her logical nature couldn't ignore, leaving her confused and distressed. "Sarah," Harry said carefully, what if some things that seem impossible aren't really impossible? What if there are things in the world that most people just don't know about?" Sarah stared at him with those magnified eyes, and for a moment Harry thought she might piece together the truth. But then she shook her head, looking frustrated and tired. "Magic isn't real, Harry. Everyone knows that." but I can't stop feeling like there's something I'm forgetting. Something important. That evening, Harry confronted Severus with an anger and heartbreak that shocked them both. "You broke her!" Harry shouted, tears streaming down his 7-year-old face. "She was my friend, and you broke her mind." Severus, who had been dreading this conversation, knelt down to Harry's level. "I had to, Harry. Too many people saw what happened. If I hadn't modified their memories—" "But not all of it," Harry interrupted. "You didn't get all of Sarah's memory, did you? You left pieces behind, and now she's confused and scared and doesn't understand why." The accusation hit home because it was entirely accurate. Severus had indeed failed to completely erase Sarah's memories, and the partial modification was causing her exactly the kind of distress Harry described. "I did the best I could," Severus said quietly. "Memory magic is complicated, especially with someone as intelligent as Sarah. Sometimes the mind resists." "Then you should have tried harder." Harry's voice cracked with emotion. "She was the only friend I've ever had. And now she looks at me like I'm a stranger. She knows something's wrong, but she can't remember what, and it's making her miserable." Severus felt his own temper rising, fueled by guilt and fear. "Do you understand what could have happened if I hadn't acted? The Ministry could have detected that magic. Auras could have come investigating. We could have been discovered, separated." "So what?" Harry shot back with the passionate logic of childhood. "Maybe that would be better than this. Maybe I'd rather be with people who know the truth about magic than hiding with you and hurting the people I care about." The words hit Severus like a physical blow. In 7 years of raising Harry, they had never had a fight like this, never faced such a fundamental disagreement about the choices they'd made together. "Harry," Severus said, his voice strained, "you don't understand the dangers." "I understand that we're hiding from something," Harry said, his 7-year-old mind making connections that Severus hadn't expected. "We're not just keeping magic secret because people wouldn't understand. We're hiding from specific people, aren't we? People who would hurt us or take me away." The perceptiveness of the observation left Severus momentarily speechless. Harry was right. Their isolation wasn't just about magical secrecy. It was about staying hidden from Dumbledore, from the Ministry, from anyone who might try to separate them or use Harry for their own purposes. "Yes," Severus admitted finally. "We're hiding from people who would separate us if they found us." Harry absorbed this information with the serious concentration he brought to complex magical theory. "And these people, they're more dangerous than the hurt we cause people like Sarah?" It was an impossible question to answer honestly. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that yes, protecting their family unit was worth causing collateral damage to innocent bystanders? How did you justify the necessary cruelties that came with staying hidden? "I don't know," Severus said finally, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "I honestly don't know anymore." Harry stared at him for a long moment, and Severus could see his son processing this unprecedented display of uncertainty from the adult he'd always trusted to have answers. "I don't want to hurt people anymore," Harry said quietly. "Sarah didn't deserve what happened to her. And if staying hidden means we have to keep hurting innocent people, then maybe we need to find a different way to stay safe." That night, after Harry had cried himself to sleep, Severus sat in his kitchen, staring at the letter from Xenophilius Lovegood that he'd never sent. Harry's words echoed in his mind. Maybe we need to find a different way to stay safe. For 7 years, Severus had believed that complete isolation was the only way to protect Harry from the forces that would use or manipulate him. But watching his son's heartbreak over Sarah's damaged memories, seeing the moral conflicts that their hidden life was creating, he began to wonder if their cure had become worse than the disease. Outside, the street lamps of Spinner's End cast their familiar glow through the kitchen window. But inside, the foundation of their carefully constructed world had developed its first serious crack, and both Harry and Severus were beginning to question whether the structure they'd built could, or should, survive much longer. Chapter 7. Letters That Never Came. July 31st, 1991, dawned bright and clear over Spinner's End, a perfect summer morning that seemed to mock the growing tension in the small house where Harry Potter was about to turn 11 years old. Severus Snape, now 31, and marked by a decade of devoted but anxious parenting, he stood at the kitchen window watching for Owl Post that he knew would never come. In the wizarding world, July 31st was significant for more than one reason. It was Harry Potter's birthday, yes, but it was also the day that Hogwarts letters traditionally arrived for children beginning their magical education. For 10 years, Severus had dreaded this day. "Sev!" Harry's voice carried down the stairs, bright with excitement. "Is it birthday time yet?" Despite everything, the looming revelations, the weight of secrets that grew heavier each year, Severus smiled. Some things never changed. Harry still approached birthdays with the same enthusiasm he'd shown as a toddler, still thundered down the stairs with his hair sticking up at impossible angles. They still looked at Severus with those impossibly green eyes that could make the most hardened heart melt. "Happy birthday, Harry," Severus said, turning from the window to embrace the boy who had become the center of his universe. At 11, Harry was tall for his age, all long limbs and growing coordination. His face still held the softness of childhood, but Severus could see hints of the man he would become. James Potter's strong jaw, Lily's delicate features, and something entirely his own in the thoughtful intelligence that seemed to radiate from every expression. 11, Harry said wonderfully, as if testing the weight of the number. "That's practically grown up, isn't it?" "Practically," Severus agreed, though his stomach clenched at the words. 11 was grown up in the wizarding world, old enough for Hogwarts, old enough to begin formal magical education, old enough to learn about the legacy that Harry would never be able to claim. They had established birthday traditions over the years, a special breakfast with Harry's favorite foods, thoughtful presents that combined education with enjoyment, and an afternoon doing whatever activity Harry chose. This year, Harry had requested that they spend the day in their garden, perhaps reading together or working on the advanced potion theory that had become his favorite subject. "Do you know what I was thinking about this morning?" Harry asked, as Severus prepared his birthday breakfast, pancakes shaped like cauldrons, a tradition that had started when Harry was 5, and declared them more interesting than circles. "What were you thinking about?" Harry settled at the kitchen table, his expression unusually serious for someone celebrating a birthday. "I was wondering why we never get letters." Severus's hands stilled on the mixing bowl. "Letters?" "Mail," Harry clarified. "Other people get letters from friends, relatives, businesses. The post comes every day for our neighbors, but nothing ever comes for us. It's like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's like we don't officially exist." The observation was too perceptive, too close to the truth. At 11, Harry had developed the kind of analytical mind that missed nothing and questioned everything. Severus had known this day would come, but he'd hoped for more time. "We live quietly," Severus said carefully. "We don't need—" "But what about my school?" Harry interrupted. "I'm 11 now. Shouldn't there be information about secondary school, or enrollment forms, something? The other children I see around the neighborhood, they talk about starting new schools at 11. Where am I supposed to go?" Severus set the mixing bowl down with hands that had begun to shake slightly. For 10 years he had provided Harry with an extraordinary education, magical theory, advanced academics, languages, critical thinking skills that surpassed most university graduates. But formal schooling, official recognition, the normal milestones that marked childhood, these were luxuries they couldn't afford. "Your education is far beyond what any normal school could provide," Severus said finally. "But what about certificates, qualifications? How will I ever get a job or go to university if there's no record that I've learned anything?" Each question was a small knife twist of reality. Harry was absolutely right. Their hidden life had educational advantages, but social and legal disadvantages that would only become more problematic as Harry grew older. "We'll address those issues when the time comes," Severus said, hating the evasiveness in his own voice. Harry stared at him for a long moment, and Severus could see the wheels turning in that remarkable mind. "There's something you're not telling me," Harry said quietly. "Something important." Before Severus could respond, Harry suddenly straightened in his chair. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared upstairs with the determined stride of someone who had just made a significant decision. Severus knew, with the sick certainty that comes with long-dreaded moments, that the careful edifice of their hidden life was about to crumble. So Harry returned 15 minutes later, carrying a wooden box that Severus recognized with horror. It was the container where he kept old Daily Prophet newspapers, stored in the attic and warded with charms that should have prevented anyone from finding them. "Your wards don't work on me," Harry said, noticing Severus's expression. "They never have. I've known about these for years, but I never looked because you clearly didn't want me to. But now," he set the box on the kitchen table with trembling hands, "I need to understand why we're hiding." The newspapers were dated from 1981 to the present, a decade of wizarding news that Severus had collected to monitor any mentions of Harry Potter or searches for the missing boy who lived. Harry opened the first paper, the one from November 2nd, to 1981, and Severus watched his son's face change as he read the headline, "Boy Who Lived. Vanishes Mystery Surrounds Missing Hero." There was a photograph beneath the headline. Baby Harry, barely 15 months old, sitting in Lily Potter's lap and laughing at something off camera. Lily looked radiant and alive, her red hair catching the sunlight, her green eyes bright with maternal joy. Harry stared at the photograph for a long time, his face pale and shocked. "That's you," he said quietly to the picture, "and that's my mother." "Harry," Severus began, "her eyes are the same as mine." Harry's voice was barely above a whisper. "Everyone always says I have unusual eyes, but they're not unusual. They're hers." He read the article with the focused intensity he brought to complex magical texts, absorbing every detail about the night Voldemort attacked Godric's Hollow, the death of James and Lily Potter, and the mysterious disappearance of their son. When he finished, he looked up at Severus with an expression of profound betrayal. "Harry Potter," he said. "The boy who lived. That's me, isn't it?" Severus found that his voice had deserted him entirely. He could only nod. "My parents are dead." It wasn't a question. They were murdered by someone called you-know-who, and I somehow survived, and now I'm missing, and the entire wizarding world has been looking for me for 10 years. "Yes," Severus managed to say. Harry picked up another newspaper, then another, reading headlines about search efforts, speculation about his whereabouts, theories about who might have taken him, or if there were photographs from various years, artists' renderings of what Harry Potter might look like at different ages, all bearing remarkable resemblances to the boy sitting at Severus's kitchen table. "According to this," Harry said, his voice becoming steadier as he processed the information, "I'm supposedly the most famous child in the wizarding world. I defeated a dark wizard when I was a baby, and there are people who consider me some kind of symbol or hero." "That's correct." "And you," Harry continued, looking directly at Severus, "you took me from wherever I was supposed to go, and you've been hiding me ever since." "Yes." Harry set down the newspaper he'd been reading and looked at Severus with an expression far too mature for an 11-year-old face. "Why?" It was such a simple question, but it contained the weight of a decade's worth of decisions, sacrifices, and desperate love. "Because," Severus said, his voice rough with emotion, "the people who wanted to control your life didn't care about what you needed. They saw you as a weapon, a symbol, a tool to be used for their own purposes. They would have placed you with relatives who despised magic, who would have made you feel ashamed of everything that made you special. The Dursleys, Harry said, having clearly read the relevant articles. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. Your mother's sister, Severus confirmed, who hated Lily for being magical and would have hated you for the same reason. Harry absorbed this information with the same analytical approach he brought to everything else. So you took me to protect me from people who would have used me or mistreated me? Yes. But in doing so, you made it impossible for me to have a normal childhood, normal friendships, or any connection to the magical world I was born into. The accusation hit home because it was entirely accurate. Severus had protected Harry from exploitation and abuse, but that protection had come at the cost of isolation and secrecy that had shaped every aspect of the boy's life. I did what I thought was best, Severus said quietly. What about Hogwarts? Harry asked, picking up a newspaper from 1989 that featured an article about the school. I should be getting my letter today, shouldn't I? My acceptance to the magical school where I could learn properly, make friends who understand magic, and be part of the world I actually belong to. If you were registered with the Ministry of Magic, yes. But you're not. Officially, Harry Potter is still missing, and Harry Snape is a muggle child with no magical heritage. Harry stared at him in shock. You mean I can never go to Hogwarts? Never learn magic properly? Never meet other magical children my age? The despair in Harry's voice nearly broke Severus's heart. Not without exposing our location and risking everything we've built together. Everything we've built, Harry repeated slowly. You mean this hidden life where I can't be who I really am, where I can't use my real name, where I have to lie about my abilities and pretend to be something I'm not? Where you're safe, Severus said firmly. Where you're loved unconditionally. Where you can develop your abilities without pressure or exploitation. Harry was quiet for a long time, processing everything he'd learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and vulnerable. Do you ever regret it? Taking me, I mean. Giving up whatever life you had planned to raise someone else's child in secret? The question pierced through every defense Severus had built around his heart. He knelt beside Harry's chair and looked directly into those green eyes, Lily's eyes, that had guided every decision he'd made for the past decade. Never, he said, with absolute conviction. Taking you was the best decision I've ever made. You are not someone else's child. You are my son in every way that matters. These 10 years with you have been the happiest of my life. Tears began to fall down Harry's cheeks. But even though I'm not really yours, even though I'm just a burden you took on out of guilt or obligation, you are mine, Severus said fiercely, pulling Harry into his arms. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Choice does. I chose you, and I choose you every day. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. Harry clung to him, this remarkable 11-year-old who had just learned that his entire identity was built on necessary lies, who had discovered that he was simultaneously the most famous and most hidden child in the wizarding world. I don't know how to be Harry Potter, Harry whispered against Severus's shoulder. You don't have to be, Severus said softly. Harry Potter is a symbol, a myth, an idea that people created because they needed a hero. You are Harry Snape, brilliant, kind, curious, and loved beyond measure. That's all you ever need to be. But what about my parents? What about my heritage, my history, the world I came from? Severus pulled back to look at Harry's face. Your parents were extraordinary people who died protecting you. Lily Potter was the brightest witch of her generation, kind and brave and fiercely loyal. James Potter was courageous and loving, willing to die for his family. They would be proud of the person you've become. How do you know so much about them? Severus hesitated, then decided that this was not the time for partial truths. Because I knew them. I went to school with your parents. Lily was... she was my best friend, until I made choices that destroyed our friendship. When I found you that night, it was like being given a chance to protect something precious that I had failed to save." Harry stared at him with wonder. "You knew my mother?" "I loved your mother," Severus said simply. "Not romantically. She loved your father, and they were perfect for each other. But I loved her as the first person who was ever truly kind to me, who saw something worth saving in a bitter, angry boy from Spinner's End. And now you love me. Now I love you," Severus confirmed, "more than I ever thought possible." They sat together in the kitchen as the morning sun moved across the walls, surrounded by newspapers that told the story of the boy who lived while the real Harry Potter, now Harry Snape, grappled with an identity crisis that no 11-year-old should have to face. "What happens now?" Harry asked eventually. "Now you decide what you want to do with this information," Severus said. "We can continue as we have been, building our life away from the magical world's expectations, or we can start exploring ways to safely integrate you back into magical society, though that would involve considerable risks." Harry looked at the newspapers scattered across the table, then at Severus. "I want to think about it," he said finally. It's a lot to process." "Of course. And Harry? Whatever you decide, we decide together. This is your choice as much as mine now." That afternoon, instead of their planned garden activities, they spent Harry's 11th birthday reading through the collected newspapers together. Severus answered every question Harry had about his parents, about the magical world, about the forces they'd been hiding from. It was painful and necessary, and long overdue. As the sun set over Spinner's End, Harry made a decision that would shape both their futures. "I want to learn more about the magical world," he said. "Not to become Harry Potter the symbol, but to understand where I come from. And I want you to teach me properly, not just theory, but real magic. If I'm going to be hidden, at least let me be hidden and educated." Severus smiled, feeling something that might have been hope. "I can arrange that. And Sev, thank you for choosing me, for loving me enough to give up everything else. I understand now why you did it, and I'm grateful." Outside, owls began their evening flights across the darkening sky, carrying letters and messages throughout the magical world. But in the small house at Spinner's End, the most important communication had already taken place. The conversation between a father and son who had chosen each other against all odds, who had built a family on love and truth and the courage to protect what mattered most. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, might remain hidden from the world that claimed to need him. But Harry Snape, beloved son and brilliant young wizard, was exactly where he belonged. Chapter 8. The Outside World Intrudes. The first sign that their carefully maintained isolation was becoming unsustainable came on a humid August morning in 1992, when Harry Potter, who had been 12 years old for 3 weeks, accidentally turned water into wine during what should have been a simple chemistry lesson. "That's not supposed to happen," Harry said, staring at the beaker of deep red liquid that had been plain water moments before. The molecular structure of H2O doesn't spontaneously rearrange into ethanol and organic compounds. It's chemically impossible. Severus, now 32, and increasingly concerned about the trajectory of Harry's magical development, carefully took the beaker and examined its contents. The transformation was perfect. Not just the appearance of wine, but the actual chemical composition had changed at the molecular level. This wasn't transfiguration or illusion. This was fundamental alteration of matter that shouldn't be possible even with advanced magic. "Harry," Severus said carefully, "what were you thinking about when this happened?" "I was reading about the chemical processes in fermentation," Harry replied, his green eyes troubled. "I was trying to understand how ancient peoples might have discovered wine-making, and I was imagining what it would be like to witness that first, accidental transformation of grape juice into something more complex." He paused, frowning. But I was only imagining it. I wasn't trying to make it happen. This was the problem. Over the past year, since Harry had learned the truth about his identity, his magical abilities had begun manifesting in ways that defied explanation. Not accidental magic. Harry had mastered emotional control years ago. But something deeper and more concerning. His magic was responding to his intellectual curiosity, his desire to understand and experience things he read about. And 2 weeks ago, while studying medieval history, Harry had wondered aloud what it might have been like to see a working windmill from the period. The next morning, Severus had found an exact replica of a 12th century Dutch windmill in their back garden, complete with functional grinding stones and historically accurate construction techniques. Last month, during a discussion about astronomy, Harry had expressed frustration that light pollution made it impossible to see the stars clearly from Cokeworth. That evening, the aurora borealis had appeared over Yorkshire, a meteorological impossibility that had made the national news and baffled scientists across the country. "Your magic is evolving," Severus said, finally. "It's no longer just responding to emotion or conscious intent. It's responding to your intellectual engagement, your curiosity about how things work." "Is that bad?" Harry asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "It's unprecedented," Severus replied honestly, "and it's becoming increasingly difficult to hide." The magical windmill had required hasty dismantling and memory charms on 3 neighbours who had noticed it. The Aurora incident had been impossible to cover up, though fortunately the magical community had assumed it was a natural anomaly rather than the result of a 12-year-old's idle curiosity about celestial phenomena. But now Harry was creating wine from water during a simple lesson, and Severus could feel the protective wards around their house straining to contain the magical energy that seemed to radiate from his son in ever-increasing waves. "We need to discuss your education," Severus said, settling across from Harry at their kitchen table. "The magical theory I've been teaching you is clearly insufficient for your developing abilities. You need practical instruction, controlled environments for experimentation, and probably guidance from multiple specialists." Harry's face lit up with hope and longing. "Does this mean—" "It means we need to consider alternatives to complete isolation," Severus said carefully. "But not Hogwarts, and not exposure to the broader magical community. Something in between." Before Harry could respond, a sharp crack echoed from their front garden, the unmistakable sound of apparition. Severus tensed, his wand appearing in his hand with practiced speed, but Harry was already moving toward the window. "There's someone at our gate," Harry reported. "Tall man, very blonde hair, and wearing robes with— Are those illustrations of crumple-horned snorkax?" Severus felt his blood run cold. He recognized that description, and if he was right about the visitor's identity, their situation had just become infinitely more complicated. "Xenophilius Lovegood," he muttered. "Who?" "Luna Lovegood's father, editor of the Quibbler, and quite possibly the only person in the magical world who might recognize you on sight and not immediately contact the authorities." They watched through the window as Xenophilius approached their front door with the confident stride of someone who believed absolutely in his own theories, no matter how outlandish they might seem to others. He knocked with the distinctive pattern that suggested magical upbringing. 3 sharp raps, pause, 2 more, pause, 1 final knock. Severus opened the door with his wand, hidden but ready. "Mr. Lovegood, this is unexpected." Xenophilius beamed, his protuberant eyes bright with excitement. "Severus Snape! I knew it had to be you. Who else would have the skill and the motivation to hide the boy who lived so effectively?" His gaze shifted to Harry, who had appeared at Severus's shoulder. "And you, young man, are absolutely unmistakable. Those eyes, that facial structure. You're definitely Lily Potter's son." "I think you should come inside," Severus said grimly, opening the door wider. "Quickly." Once they were settled in the front room, Xenophilius launched into what could charitably be called an explanation, and more accurately described as a comprehensive conspiracy theory. "I've been tracking the magical disturbances around Cokeworth for months," he said, pulling out a hand-drawn map covered in cryptic symbols and arrows. "Aurora phenomena, spontaneous architectural manifestation, localized weather anomalies, all centered on this general area. The magical signature was too powerful and too distinctive to be coincidental." "You've been watching us?" Severus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, not watching exactly," Xenophilius clarified cheerfully. "More like monitoring magical probability fluctuations. The universe has a way of announcing when something significant is happening, you know. And Harry Potter learning to use his true abilities, that's definitely significant." Harry, who had been listening with fascination, leaned forward. "You knew I was here?" "I suspected," Xenophilius said. "The official story never made sense. Baby vanishes from a secure location without a trace. Or either he was taken by someone with exceptional skill and compelling motivation, or he was never actually missing in the first place. Given Dumbledore's tendency toward manipulation and long-term planning, I favored the theory that you were being hidden deliberately." "And you approve?" Severus asked, surprised despite himself. "Approve?" Xenophilius laughed. "My dear man, I think it's brilliant. Dumbledore has a history of treating powerful magical children as chess pieces rather than human beings. Keeping Harry away from that influence, allowing him to develop naturally without the pressure of public expectations? It's exactly what the boy needed." Harry looked between Severus and their unexpected visitor. "Mr. Lovegood, are there others like us? As other families who've chosen to hide rather than participate in the official magical community?" "Oh yes," Xenophilius said enthusiastically. "More than you might think. The Clearwaters have been living quietly in Wales since their daughter manifested prophetic abilities at age 7. They were tired of ministry officials treating her like a valuable resource rather than a child. The Jorkins family disappeared after their son showed signs of natural legitimacy. Too many people wanted to use his abilities for their own purposes." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "There's actually an informal network of us. Families who've opted out of official magical society for various reasons. We help each other when needed, share resources and information, or provide education and socialization opportunities that don't require ministry registration." Severus felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. "Education opportunities?" "Absolutely. Rotating tutors, specialized instruction, group lessons for children with similar abilities." Xenophilius beamed at Harry. "We even have our own version of magical school. Smaller groups, individualized attention, none of the political nonsense that comes with traditional institutions." Harry's eyes were bright with excitement. "Real magical education? With other children?" "With other children whose families understand the value of privacy and independence," Xenophilius confirmed. "Children who've been raised to think for themselves rather than accept authority without question." Before either Severus or Harry could respond, a sharp beeping sound echoed through the house, the ward alarm that Severus had installed to detect official magical surveillance. "Ministry detection charms," Severus said grimly, moving to the window. "Something triggered their automatic monitoring systems." "Ah," Xenophilius said calmly. "That would be the wine incident this morning. Spontaneous matter transformation tends to register rather dramatically on magical monitoring equipment." Severus stared at him. "You knew about that?" "I know about most of Harry's recent magical manifestations. The boy is remarkably powerful, more so than his parents, I'd guess, and they were both exceptional." Xenophilius stood and began moving toward the door. "Don't worry about the ministry detection. I've already dealt with it." "What do you mean? Dealt with it?" "Let's just say that certain junior officials at the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures have been convinced that the magical disturbances in this area are due to a rare species of British billywig that's recently started breeding in abandoned industrial sites. Xenophilius winked. Amazing what people will believe when you present the information with sufficient confidence and appropriately official-looking documentation. As if to demonstrate his point, 2 figures in ministry robes apparated near their front gate, spent several minutes performing detection charms, then disapparated with expressions of mild disappointment. Whatever they had detected, they apparently found Xenophilius's explanation satisfactory. "Billywigs?" Harry asked. "Entirely imaginary." "But the paperwork was very convincing," Xenophilius said proudly. "One of the advantages of running a publication like the Quibbler, you develop quite a talent for creative documentation." Severus found himself reassessing the eccentric wizard. Behind the wild theories and unusual appearance, Xenophilius Lovegood was clearly more capable than his reputation suggested. "Why are you helping us?" Severus asked. "Because I believe in choice," Xenophilius said simply. Harry deserves to grow up as himself, not as other people's idea of what he should be. And you, Severus, deserve credit for the remarkable job you've done raising him. The boy is brilliant, thoughtful, and clearly loved. That's worth protecting. Harry, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Lovegood, you mentioned education opportunities. Would it be possible for me to learn with other children like me? Children who understand about keeping secrets, but still get to study real magic?" "I think that could be arranged," Xenophilius said gently. "Would you like me to look into it?" Harry looked at Severus with an expression of such hope that Severus felt his careful protective walls crumbling. His son needed more than he could provide alone. That much had become increasingly clear. But perhaps the answer wasn't exposure to the wider magical world. Perhaps it was connection to a smaller, safer community of people who understood the value of privacy and choice. "Yes," Severus said finally. "We'd like to explore that option." "Excellent!" Xenophilius clapped his hands together. "I'll arrange for you to meet some of the other families. And in the meantime..." He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you, Harry. A welcoming gift from those of us who believe in the right to magical privacy." Harry unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. Not HP, but HS for Harry Snape, acknowledging the identity he had chosen over the one he'd been born with. "It's charmed for magical experimentation," Xenophilius explained. "Whatever you write or draw in it becomes real in miniature form, perfect for testing theories without causing large-scale reality alterations. Should help with that matter transformation issue." Harry hugged the journal to his chest, looking happier than Severus had seen him since before the playground incident with Sarah years ago. Then after Xenophilius left with promises to arrange meetings and provide more information about their hidden community, Harry and Severus sat in their kitchen, processing everything that had changed in the span of a single afternoon. "Are we really going to do this?" Harry asked. "Trust other people with our secret?" "I think," Severus said slowly, "that we're going to take very small, very careful steps toward trusting the right people. People who understand what we're trying to protect. And I might get to learn magic with other children? Real magic? Not just theory?" "It's possible," Severus admitted, "though we'll be extremely careful about who we trust and how much we reveal." That evening, as Harry experimented with his new journal, creating tiny, perfect replicas of complex magical phenomena, Severus found himself contemplating a future he hadn't dared imagine. Perhaps complete isolation hadn't been the only way to keep Harry safe. Perhaps there were others who shared their values, who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you could do for a child was to let them choose their own path. Outside, the street lamps of Spinner's End flickered in the summer breeze. But inside, the walls of their carefully constructed world had developed new windows, new possibilities, new reasons for hope. And in his room, Harry Potter, who had chosen to be Harry Snape, wrote in his magical journal about the community he might join, the friends he might make, and the education he might finally receive. For the first time since learning his true identity, the future felt full of possibilities rather than limitations. Chapter 9. The Weight of Secrets. The discovery came by accident, as life-changing revelations often do. Harry had been searching for spare parchment in Severus's study. Their increased correspondence with Xenophilius Lovegood's network of hidden magical families required more writing materials than their household usually kept, when he opened the wrong drawer and found himself staring at a collection of official documents that made his 13-year-old heart sink with understanding. The top letter was dated August 1987, 6 years after the night Severus had taken Harry from Godric's Hollow. It bore the Hogwarts seal and was written in Professor McGonagall's precise script. Mr. Snape, we write once again to formally request that you honor your commitment to accept the position of Potions Master at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Your extended absence from our previous correspondence has raised concerns among the faculty and board of governors. The position remains open, as we have been unable to find a suitable replacement with your level of expertise. Several students have expressed disappointment at the continued use of substitute instructors for such a critical subject. We implore you to reconsider. Your knowledge and skill would benefit generations of young witches and wizards. Respectfully yours, Professor M. McGonagall. Deputy Headmistress Harry's hands trembled as he read through letter after letter, each one more desperate than the last. Hogwarts had wanted Severus badly, not just as a teacher, but as the Potions Master, a position of significant prestige and influence within the magical education system. But Hogwarts wasn't the only institution that had sought Severus's expertise. There were letters from St. Mungo's Hospital offering him a position as head of potions development, a formal invitation from the International Academy of Potioneers to present research at their annual symposium in Vienna, job offers from Beaubaton Academy, Durmstrang Institute, and the Salem Witches Institute. A particularly impressive offer from the Department of Mysteries requesting his consultation on highly classified alchemical projects of national importance. Each letter represented an opportunity declined, a door closed, a dream deferred. At the bottom of the collection, Harry found something that made his chest tighten with emotion, a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be original potions research. The notes were in Severus's careful handwriting, dating from 1980 and 1981, before Harry had entered his life. Complex formulas for healing drafts that could repair nerve damage, theoretical frameworks for potions that might cure previously incurable magical maladies, innovative brewing techniques that could revolutionize potion making. This wasn't just career ambition, this was passion, dedication, the life's work of someone who had found their calling and was pursuing it with single-minded devotion. Harry closed the drawer with trembling hands, his mind reeling with the implications of what he'd discovered. All these years he had known that Severus was brilliant, or that he was an exceptional teacher and researcher. But he hadn't understood the magnitude of what Severus had given up to raise him. Severus Snape could have been one of the most influential figures in the magical world. He could have taught at prestigious schools, conducted groundbreaking research, been published in academic journals, received recognition for his innovative contributions to magical theory. Instead, he had spent 13 years in a cramped house in Spinner's End, teaching one student, living in isolation, sacrificing every professional opportunity that came his way. "Harry!" Severus's voice came from the doorway, tinged with concern. "What's wrong? You look pale?" Harry turned to face the man who had raised him, this 33-year-old wizard who had given up everything for a child who wasn't even truly his own. Though Severus looked older than his years, the stress of their hidden life, the constant vigilance, the weight of protecting such a secret had taken its toll. "I found your letters," Harry said quietly. "From Hogwarts, from St. Mungo's. From everyone who wanted you to work for them. Severus's face went very still. I see. You could have been famous, Harry continued, his voice thick with emotion. You could have been respected, accomplished, living the life you'd planned. Instead, you're here with me, hiding, giving up everything you worked for. Harry, no, let me finish. Harry stood up straighter, trying to find words for the guilt and gratitude warring in his chest. I've been so selfish. All these years, I've taken your teaching, your care, your love for granted. I never thought about what you gave up to provide it. Severus moved closer, his dark eyes searching Harry's face. You were a child. You weren't supposed to think about such things. I'm 13 now, Harry said firmly. I'm old enough to understand that you sacrificed your entire career for me. Your research, your ambitions, your chance to make a real difference in the world. You gave it all up for someone else's child. The words hit Severus like a physical blow. You are not someone else's child, he said fiercely. You are my son. You have been my son from the moment I chose to take you home with me. But at what cost? Harry's voice cracked. Sev, you could have been the most respected potions master in Europe. You could have developed cures for diseases, taught hundreds of students, has been published in every major magical journal. Instead, you're stuck here with me, and I'm not worth all that. Not worth it? Severus's voice was dangerously quiet. Harry, you are worth more than any career, any recognition, any achievement I might have gained. You are the best thing I have ever done with my life. But I need to be, Harry said desperately. I need to prove that I'm worthy of what you've sacrificed. I need to show you that your choice was the right one. Before Severus could respond, Harry was moving, pulling out his advanced potions kit and setting up equipment with the frantic energy of someone trying to prove their entire worth through a single action. What are you doing? I'm going to brew the Perfectus Curare, Harry said, referring to one of the theoretical healing drafts from Severus's abandoned research. The nerve restoration potion from your notes. If I can successfully complete an NEWT level original potion, maybe I can show you that I'm worth the sacrifice you made. Harry, that potion is theoretical. It's never been successfully brewed. The magical interactions are too complex. Then I'll be the first to get it right, Harry said stubbornly, already measuring ingredients with shaking hands. I have to try. I have to prove that I'm worth what you gave up for me. Severus watched in growing alarm as Harry began the most complex brewing process either of them had ever attempted. The Perfectus Curare required 17 different ingredients, each added at precisely the right temperature, with stirring patterns that had to be executed flawlessly, and timing that allowed for no margin of error. Harry, please, this is dangerous. The theoretical instability coefficients alone. I can do this, Harry insisted, his voice tight with concentration and desperation. I've studied your notes. I understand the principles. I just need to execute them properly. For the first hour, everything seemed to be going well. Harry's natural talent for potions, combined with years of Severus's expert instruction, guided him through the early stages of the brewing process. The potion progressed through the expected color changes, silver to deep blue to brilliant gold, and the magical resonance felt stable. But theoretical research and practical application were two very different things, and there were variables that even Severus's brilliant mind hadn't fully accounted for when he'd developed the formula. The problem began during the 7th stirring sequence, when the potion's color shifted to an ominous purple-black instead of the expected emerald green. Harry, determined to salvage his proof of worthiness, tried to compensate by adjusting the temperature and adding a stabilizing agent. It was exactly the wrong thing to do. The magical explosion that followed was contained by the protective wards Severus had placed around their makeshift laboratory years ago, but the force of it threw both Harry and Severus across the room and filled the air with toxic vapors that burned their lungs and made their vision blur. Harry found himself pinned under a section of collapsed shelving. His left arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his breathing laboured from inhaling the failed potion's fumes. But his first thought wasn't for his own injuries. It was the sick realization that he had failed, that he had proven himself unworthy of Severus's sacrifices in the most dramatic way possible. "Sev?" he called weakly. "Sev, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Harry!" Severus's voice was hoarse but urgent. "Don't move. The vapours are still settling." Severus appeared beside him moments later, his face pale and streaked with soot, his hands already performing diagnostic charms to assess Harry's injuries. "Broken arm," he muttered. "Possible concussion, lung irritation from the fumes. Hold still." As Severus worked to heal Harry's injuries, first a pain-relieving potion, then bone-mending charms, then a draught to counteract the toxic effects of the failed brew, Harry felt tears of shame and disappointment rolling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I wanted to prove I was worth it, and instead I proved I'm just a foolish child who nearly got us both killed." Severus paused in his healing work, his dark eyes focusing intently on Harry's face. "Is that what you think? That you need to prove your worth to me?" "Don't I?" Harry asked miserably. "You gave up everything for me. Your career, your recognition, your chance to make a real impact on the world. The least I can do is show you that I'm capable of something extraordinary." "Harry," Severus said, gently, setting aside his healing potions and taking Harry's uninjured hand, "you don't understand. You are extraordinary. Not because of what you might brew or achieve, but because of who you are. You are kind, brilliant, curious, compassionate. You ask thoughtful questions and care deeply about other people's well-being. You've brought more joy and purpose to my life than any career could have. But your research—" "My research was important to me once," Severus acknowledged. "But you want to know the truth? I haven't thought about those abandoned projects in years. Do you know why?" Harry shook his head. "Because watching you grow and learn has been infinitely more rewarding than any potion I could have developed. Teaching you, seeing your mind expand and your abilities develop, being part of your journey, that's been the greatest achievement of my life." Harry stared at him through the settling dust and residual magical energy from their disaster. "Really? Really?" Severus squeezed Harry's hand gently. "I chose you, Harry. Not reluctantly, not out of obligation, but gladly. Every day for 13 years I have chosen you. And I would make the same choice again, knowing everything I know now. Even though I just nearly killed us both trying to prove something stupid." Severus's mouth quirked into the ghost of a smile. "Especially because you cared enough about my sacrifices to risk dangerous magic, trying to honor them. Though next time, perhaps we could discuss your plans before you attempt to brew theoretical potions." Harry let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. "I love you, Dad." The word slipped out naturally, unconsciously, but its impact was immediate and profound. Harry had called Severus Sev for over a decade, had acknowledged him as a father figure, had accepted him as the most important person in his world. But he had never called him Dad, that simple, powerful word that spoke of belonging and choice and family bonds that transcended blood. Severus went very still, his dark eyes filling with tears that he didn't try to hide. "What did you call me?" "Dad," Harry repeated, more confidently this time. "Because that's what you are. Not because you have to be, but because you chose to be. Because you've loved me and protected me and taught me and sacrificed for me for 13 years. Because when I think of family, I think of you." Severus broke down then, 13 years of careful emotional control crumbling as he finally allowed himself to fully feel and acknowledge the depth of his love for this extraordinary boy who had become his son. He pulled Harry into a careful embrace, mindful of his healing injuries, and wept for everything they had both lost and found. He wept for Lily, whose death had brought such sorrow, but whose son had brought such unexpected joy. He wept for the man he had been, bitter, lonely, defined by his failures and regrets. He wept for the sacrifices that had felt so significant once, but now seemed so insignificant compared to what he had gained. "I love you too," he whispered into Harry's hair, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. You saved me, Harry, just as much as I saved you." They sat together in the ruins of their makeshift laboratory, surrounded by the debris of failed ambition, but filled with the success of chosen family. Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of politics and power and public expectation. But inside their small house in Spinner's End, a father and son who had found each other against all odds, held each other close, and knew that they had everything they needed. "Dad?" Harry said eventually, as Severus helped him to his feet. "Yes? Next time I want to prove something. Maybe I'll just clean the house really well instead of attempting dangerous magical experiments." Severus laughed, really laughed, with genuine joy and relief. "That sounds like an excellent plan. Though perhaps we should also work on some safer advanced potions. Your technique was actually quite impressive, despite the explosive results." As they began cleaning up the disaster area, working side by side with the comfortable efficiency of family, Harry reflected on the strange alchemy that had brought them together, and Severus had given up professional recognition to raise him, but in return had gained something far more valuable: the love and respect of someone who chose to call him Dad not out of obligation, but out of deep, abiding gratitude and affection. It was, Harry thought, the most successful magical transformation either of them had ever achieved. Chapter 10. When the Past Comes. Calling. The end of their hidden life began with what should have been a simple Tuesday evening dinner. Harry, now 14 and tall enough to look Severus nearly in the eye, was describing his latest correspondence with the Clearwater family, part of Xenophilius Lovegood's network of hidden magical families, when every protective ward surrounding their house began screaming at once. Not the gentle chiming that indicated minor magical detection, but the harsh, urgent wailing that meant their defenses were being overwhelmed by forces far beyond their control. "What?" Harry began, but Severus was already moving, his wand in his hand and his face pale with the realization that their 13 years of careful concealment had just come to an abrupt end. "Upstairs," Severus ordered sharply. "Now, use the emergency port key if—" His words were cut off by the distinctive crack of multiple apparitions in their front garden. Through the kitchen window, Harry could see the unmistakable figures of auras in their official robes, wands drawn and moving with the coordinated precision of a strike team. "Too late," Severus said grimly. "Harry, whatever happens, let me handle this. Don't reveal who you are unless—" The front door exploded inward with a shower of splinters and magical energy. The 3 auras entered in formation, their wands trained on Severus with the kind of professional wariness that suggested they considered him extremely dangerous. "Severus Snape," said the lead aura, a woman with greying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in law enforcement. "You're under arrest for magical concealment violations, illegal harboring of a missing person, and suspected kidnapping." Harry felt his magic surge with protective fury, responding to the threat against the man he loved more than his own life. The remaining windows in the house rattled, and several of the aura's wands began sparking as Harry's uncontrolled power interfered with their magical equipment. "Arrest," Severus said calmly, though Harry could see the tension in his shoulders. "On what evidence?" "On the evidence of 14 years of magical monitoring, showing a powerful young wizard living at this address under a false identity," the lead aura replied. "A wizard whose magical signature matches historical records of Harry Potter, who disappeared from Godric's Hollow on November 1st, 1981. Harry's heart stopped. They knew. After 13 years of hiding, of careful wards and constructed identities, the Ministry knew exactly who he was and where he'd been. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Severus said, raising his hand slowly. If you'll just allow me to explain. The time for explanations is over, the aura said firmly. Harry Potter, step away from your captor. You're safe now. We're here to take you to proper guardians. Captor? Harry's voice cracked with indignation. He's not my captor. He's my father. The words hung in the air, and Harry saw the exact moment when the auras recognized him. The lightning bolt scar barely visible beneath his dark hair, the green eyes that had been described in countless missing person reports, the facial structure that combined Lily Evans's delicate features with James Potter's strong jaw. Merlin's beard, breathed one of the younger auras. It really is him. It's Harry Potter. Step away from Snape, Mr. Potter, the lead aura said, her voice gentler now, but no less firm. We know this must be confusing, but Severus Snape is a former Death Eater who kidnapped you as an infant. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's made you believe, he is not your family. Harry felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart, but his patience, his willingness to hide and cower and let other people define his life based on their assumptions and prejudices. He saved me, Harry said, his voice growing stronger with each word. He took me from a house full of death and gave me a home full of love. He taught me, protected me, sacrificed everything to raise me as his own son. And if you think I'm going to let you arrest him for giving me the best childhood anyone could ask for, you're insane. His magic was building now, responding to his emotional intensity in ways that made the air itself seem to shimmer with power. The aura's detection equipment was going mad, emitting shrill beeping sounds as Harry's magical signature overwhelmed their senses. Mr. Potter, the lead aura said carefully, you've been missing for 13 years. Your magical guardian, Albus Dumbledore, has been searching for you. Whatever Snape has told you about your past. He told me the truth, Harry interrupted. About my parents, about Voldemort, about why we had to hide. And before you try to separate us, you should know that I will not go quietly. I will not pretend to be grateful for being rescued from the only family I've ever known. Severus was watching this exchange with a mixture of pride and terror. Harry's magical display was impressive, but it was also drawing attention that could prove catastrophic for both of them. Harry, Severus said quietly, perhaps we should... He never finished the sentence. Another crack of apparition echoed through their destroyed front room, and suddenly Albus Dumbledore stood in their kitchen, his blue eyes taking in the scene with the kind of sharp intelligence that missed nothing. Good evening, Dumbledore said mildly, as if arriving at the scene of a magical standoff was the most natural thing in the world. I believe there may be some misunderstandings that require clarification. The lead aura immediately deferred to the legendary wizard. Professor Dumbledore, we've located Harry Potter. He was being held by Severus Snape under false pretenses. I was not being held, Harry said fiercely, his magic still crackling around him like visible energy. I was being loved and raised and educated by someone who chose to sacrifice everything for my well-being. Dumbledore's piercing gaze moved between Harry and Severus, and Harry could practically see the older wizard's brilliant mind processing 13 years' worth of implications. Severus, Dumbledore said finally, perhaps you would care to explain how Harry came to be in your care. I found him first, Severus replied simply. The night you sent Hagrid to collect him, I arrived at Godric's Hollow before anyone else. I saw what remained of James and Lily, saw their son sitting alone and terrified beside his mother's body, and I made a choice. A choice to defy my explicit instructions regarding Harry's placement. A choice to protect a child from being used as a weapon or a symbol, Severus corrected. A choice to give him the childhood that Lily would have wanted, one filled with love and learning rather than expectation and exploitation. Harry stepped closer to Severus, his magic settling slightly, but still radiating protective energy. "Professor Dumbledore, with all due respect, I don't care what plans you made for me when I was a baby. And this man is my father in every way that matters, and I will not be separated from him." Dumbledore studied Harry with those penetrating blue eyes, and Harry had the distinct impression that he was being evaluated not as a missing child, but as a potential threat to carefully laid plans. "You've grown powerful," Dumbledore observed. "More powerful than your parents were at your age. Severus, what kind of education has Harry received?" "Advanced magical theory from age 3, Severus replied with evident pride. "Potions mastery, defensive magic, healing arts, languages, philosophy, critical thinking. He's capable of NEWT-level work in multiple subjects." "Demonstrate," Dumbledore said to Harry, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Harry bristled at the command, but something in Severus's expression suggested this might be important. Without speaking, Harry drew his wand, a beautiful piece of holly and phoenix feather that Xenophilius had helped them acquire through his network, and began to cast. What followed was a display of magical ability that left even the experienced aurors staring in shock. Harry conjured complex illusions that moved with realistic behavior, transfigured furniture into living creatures that responded to his mental commands, created defensive shields that shimmered with multiple layers of protection, and concluded by brewing a perfect pepper-up potion using wandless magic to heat and stir the ingredients. "Remarkable," Dumbledore murmured. "Harry, you've clearly received an exceptional education. But there are aspects of your magical heritage, your destiny, that require—" "My destiny is my own," Harry interrupted, his green eyes flashing with determination that reminded everyone present forcibly of Lily Evans. "I don't care what prophecies or expectations you might have. I'm not a weapon to be pointed at your enemies, or a symbol to inspire your followers. I'm a person, and I choose to be Harry Snape, son of Severus Snape, not Harry Potter, the boy who lived." The silence that followed was broken by another aura's urgent whisper. "Professor, we're getting reports of suspicious activity near the old Death Eater safe houses. Word of Potter's discovery is already spreading. We may have security concerns." Dumbledore's expression grew grave. "Indeed. There are those who would seek to harm Harry for what he represents, and others who would seek to use him for their own purposes." He looked directly at Severus. "Your protection has been admirable, but Harry's magical signature can no longer be hidden. The choice now is between controlled exposure and chaotic revelation." "What are you proposing?" Severus asked warily. "A compromise," Dumbledore said. "Harry may remain in your care, Severus, but he must receive formal magical education. Hogwarts can provide advanced instruction and social interaction with his peers, while you maintain your role as his guardian and primary influence." Harry and Severus exchanged glances, 13 years of perfect understanding, allowing them to communicate without words. They both knew this wasn't really a choice. Their hidden life was over, and they needed to navigate the transition as carefully as possible. "Hogwarts," Harry said slowly. "As a day student? Living at home but attending classes?" "That could be arranged," Dumbledore agreed, "though there would need to be security measures, given the interest your rediscovery is likely to generate." "What kind of interest?" Harry asked, though something in Dumbledore's expression suggested he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "There are Death Eaters who were never captured," Dumbledore said seriously. "Individuals who retain loyalty to the Dark Lord's cause and might see you as either a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be claimed. Your safety will require constant vigilance." As if summoned by Dumbledore's words, a silver doe Patronus bounded into the room. Severus's doe, Harry realized with a start, was the same ethereal creature he'd seen his father cast during their practice sessions. "Lucius Malfoy has been spotted near the old safe house in Little Hangleton," the doe reported in Kingsley Shacklebolt's voice. "He's not alone. We suspect they're planning something regarding the Potter boys' location. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Harry felt Severus move closer. The protective instinct that had guided 13 years of his life still strong, despite the presence of official, magical law enforcement. "It appears," Dumbledore said grimly, "that our timeline has been accelerated. Harry, I'm afraid your choice is no longer between education and hiding, but between protection within the magical community and vulnerability outside it." Harry looked at Severus, at his father, of the man who had sacrificed everything to give him a childhood free from exactly these kinds of pressures and dangers. But he also looked at the auras, at the evidence of official attention that could no longer be avoided, at the reality of Death Eaters who might target their small family for reasons that had nothing to do with Harry's choices and everything to do with his involuntary fame. "If I agree to attend Hogwarts," Harry said carefully, "what guarantees do I have that this won't be an attempt to separate me from my father or remake me into whatever version of Harry Potter you think the world needs? You have my word," Dumbledore said solemnly, "that your relationship with Severus will be respected and protected. He has clearly done an extraordinary job raising you, and I have no desire to interfere with that bond." Severus was quiet for a long moment, and Harry could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. 13 years of successful protection now ended by the simple fact that Harry had grown too powerful to hide. The choice between continued isolation with increasing danger or integration with unknown risks but official protection. "Dad," Harry said softly, using the title that still made Severus's eyes brighten with emotion. "What do you think?" "I think," Severus said slowly, "that our time of hiding is over, whether we choose it or not. If we must rejoin the magical world, we do it on our terms, as a family." Harry nodded, feeling something that might have been relief or might have been terror. "Then we do it together." "Together," Severus confirmed, and outside their small house in Spinner's End, the magical world waited to reclaim its lost hero. But inside, a father and son who had chosen each other against all odds, prepared to face that world as a united front, ready to prove that love and choice could triumph over destiny and expectation. The boy who lived was about to return to magical society, but he would return as Harry Snape, beloved son and formidable young wizard, and no force in the magical world would be strong enough to change that fundamental truth. Chapter 11. A Different Kind of Homecoming. The Hogwarts Express had never carried a passenger quite like Harry Snape. As the scarlet locomotive wound its way through the Scottish countryside on the 1st of September, 1995, Harry pressed his face to the window of his private compartment and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building in his chest for weeks. At 15 years old, he was finally going to Hogwarts, not as the famous Harry Potter, boy who lived, but as Harry Snape, beloved son of the potions master, beginning his magical education 4 years later than most of his peers. The arrangement Dumbledore had negotiated was unprecedented in Hogwarts history. Harry would attend as a fifth-year student, living in the dormitories but maintaining his legal identity as Severus Snape's son. Severus, meanwhile, had accepted the long-delayed position of potions master, finally taking up the post he'd been offered repeatedly over the past 14 years. "Nervous?" Severus asked from the seat across from him. At 35, Harry's father looked older than his years, the stress of their recent exposure and the pressure of returning to public magical society having added new lines to his face. "Terrified," Harry admitted honestly. "I've spent 14 years learning to hide what I am. Now I have to figure out how to be myself in front of hundreds of people who think they know who I should be." "You are Harry Snape," Severus said firmly. "That is not negotiable, not up for debate, and not subject to other people's opinions about what name you should carry. Let them stare, let them whisper, let them make their assumptions. You know who you are." Through the window, Harry could see the towers of Hogwarts rising in the distance, and his stomach clenched with a mixture of excitement and dread. He had dreamed of this moment for years, or had imagined what it would be like to finally attend the most famous magical school in Britain. But he had always pictured arriving as a normal 11-year-old, not as a 15-year-old curiosity with the most complicated family situation in recent magical history. The Great Hall was exactly as magnificent as every description Harry had ever read, with its floating candles and enchanted ceiling reflecting the star-filled night sky. But as he walked through the doors behind the group of nervous first-years, Harry was acutely aware of the sudden silence that fell over the assembled students. Every eye in the hall turned to him. He heard the whispers start immediately. That's him. That's Harry Potter. But why is he with the first years? Look at his scar. It really is lightning-shaped. I heard Snape kidnapped him as a baby. Is it true he's been living as a muggle all this time? Harry kept his chin up and his expression neutral, but inside he felt like he was drowning in the attention. This was exactly what Severus had protected him from for 14 years, being treated as a specimen rather than a person, a curiosity rather than a child. Professor McGonagall approached him with the sorting hat, her expression kind but curious. "Mr. Snape," she said, and Harry felt a brief moment of gratitude that she was using his chosen name. "As our most unusual transfer student, you'll be sorted with the first years. Yet the hat will place you in the house that best suits your character and abilities." Harry nodded and took his place on the stool, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching his every move. The sorting hat settled over his head, and immediately he heard that familiar voice that he'd read about, but never expected to experience. Well, well. Harry Potter. Or should I say, Harry Snape. What an interesting development. Harry Snape, Harry thought firmly. That's who I am, indeed. And what a fascinating mind you have, young man. Brilliant, certainly. Courageous beyond question. You've spent 14 years hiding who you are to protect the man you love. Ambitious enough to excel at whatever you set your mind to. And loyal. Oh my, such loyalty. You'd die for Severus Snape without hesitation. He's my father. Yes, I can see that. Not by blood, but by choice, and those bonds are often stronger. Now, where to place you? You have the qualities for any house, but I suspect you have a preference. Harry glanced toward the staff table, where Severus sat in his familiar black robes, his dark eyes fixed intently on the sorting ceremony. Their eyes met across the great hall, and Harry saw something that might have been encouragement in his father's expression. Slytherin, Harry thought. If you're going to sort me, put me in Slytherin. I want to support my father. Ah, but that's not quite right, is it? You want to be in Slytherin to protect him, to shield him from any criticism about favoritism or nepotism. Noble, but misguided. Oh, Severus Snape doesn't need your protection. He's survived far worse than teenage gossip. No, you belong somewhere else, entirely. Gryffindor, the hat announced loudly. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers, but Harry felt a moment of disappointment. He had wanted to show his solidarity with Severus, wanted to prove that he wasn't ashamed of their connection. Don't worry, young Snape, the hat whispered, as Professor McGonagall removed it from his head. Your loyalty to your father is noted and respected, but you have your mother's heart, and that heart belongs in Gryffindor. As Harry made his way to the Gryffindor table, he was immediately surrounded by curious students, eager to meet the famous Harry Potter. But it was a round-faced boy with kind eyes who stood up first. I'm Neville Longbottom, the boy said simply. Or 5th year. Like you, I suppose. Don't mind the staring. They'll get used to you eventually. There was something in Neville's tone that suggested he knew what it was like to be stared at for the wrong reasons, and Harry felt an immediate kinship with him. Harry Snape, Harry replied, deliberately emphasizing his surname. And thank you. This is A lot. "It'll get better," said a dreamy voice from beside him. Harry turned to see a girl with dirty blonde hair and protuberant eyes that seemed to look right through him. People always stare at unusual things, but once they realize you're just a person, they mostly lose interest. "Luna Lovegood," the girl introduced herself. "Fourth year Ravenclaw. But I eat at whichever table seems most interesting. Today that's definitely Gryffindor." Over the following weeks, Harry discovered that integrating into Hogwarts life was more complex than he'd anticipated. The dormitory was the biggest challenge. After 14 years of quiet privacy with Severus, sharing a room with 4 other teenage boys felt like sensory overload. His roommates were friendly enough, but they stayed up too late talking about things Harry couldn't relate to, woke up too early, and had personal habits that made peaceful coexistence nearly impossible. More problematically, they expected him to share their interests, their concerns, their casual disrespect for authority figures. When Harry defended Professor Snape during one late-night conversation about unfair teachers, the temperature in the dormitory seemed to drop several degrees. "You can't seriously think Snape's fair," said Dean Thomas. The man takes points from Gryffindor for breathing." "Professor Snape is an excellent teacher who demands high standards," Harry replied coolly. "If students put in the effort to meet those standards, they typically find his classes rewarding." "Rewarding?" Ron Weasley snorted. "The man's a nightmare. Just because he, raised you, doesn't mean you have to defend him." "He didn't raise me," Harry said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He's my father, and I'll defend him from anyone who suggests otherwise." The silence that followed was tense and uncomfortable, and Harry realized that his relationship with Severus was going to complicate every social interaction he had at Hogwarts. His classes were a different challenge entirely. Years of advanced magical education with Severus had prepared him well, perhaps too well. In Defense Against the Dark Arts, he found himself correcting the textbook when it contained inaccuracies about curse theory. In Transfiguration, he completed assignments that were meant to take weeks in a matter of hours. In Charms, he demonstrated techniques that most students wouldn't learn until 7th year. But it was in Potions class where things became truly complicated. Severus had warned him that their public relationship would need to be different from their private one. "I cannot show favoritism," he'd said firmly. "If anything, I'll need to be harder on you than on other students, to avoid accusations of nepotism." Harry had understood intellectually, but experiencing it was different. Watching Severus treat him with cold professional distance, hearing him address Harry as Mr. to Snape in the same dismissive tone he used for students he disliked, was harder than Harry had expected. The other students, meanwhile, watched every interaction between them with hawk-like intensity, looking for signs of special treatment. When Harry brewed a perfect draught of peace in half the allotted time, whispers began immediately. "Of course he's good at potions. Snape's been teaching him for years." "Bit unfair, isn't it? He's had private tutoring while the rest of us learned from textbooks. I bet Snape gives him all the answers." The accusations stung, partly because they contained a grain of truth. Harry did have advantages: years of one-on-one instruction, access to advanced texts, understanding of theoretical principles that his classmates hadn't encountered. But they also ignored the countless hours he'd spent studying, practicing, learning from his mistakes. It was Neville who finally addressed the issue directly. "They're jealous," he said simply, as they walked from Potions to Defense Against the Dark Arts. "You're brilliant at everything. You have an interesting history, and you don't seem to care about impressing anyone. That makes some people uncomfortable." "I don't want to make people uncomfortable," Harry said honestly. "I just want to learn and not be treated like a curiosity." "Then stop trying so hard to prove you belong here," Luna said, appearing beside them as she often did, as if materializing from thin air. "You clearly belong here. Your magic sings in these corridors, but you're trying to be normal when you're obviously extraordinary. People find that suspicious." "Luna's right," Neville agreed. "Just be yourself. or let people see who you really are, not who you think they want you to be. That evening, Harry made a decision. Instead of hiding in the dormitory, avoiding his roommates' questions, he went to the common room and settled by the fire with a book on advanced magical theory. When other students approached with questions about his unusual background, he answered honestly but briefly. When they asked about his relationship with Professor Snape, he explained simply that Severus was his father, and he was proud of that fact. Slowly, gradually, he began to find his place in the social ecosystem of Hogwarts. Neville became a genuine friend, someone who understood what it was like to feel different, and who never seemed to judge Harry for his complex situation. Luna, despite being a year younger and in a different house, became another close companion, offering observations that were both insightful and comfortingly non-judgmental. Other relationships were more complicated. Many students remained fascinated by his famous status, wanting to be friends with Harry Potter rather than getting to know Harry Snape. Others seemed resentful of his abilities and advantages, treating him with suspicion that felt unearned and unfair. But perhaps the most challenging relationship was with Severus himself. In private, during their weekly meetings in Severus's office, or in their letters home, they maintained their close father-son bond. Severus asked about Harry's classes, his social adjustments, his emotional well-being. Harry shared his struggles with dormitory life, his growing friendships, his academic successes and frustrations. But in public, they maintained careful professional distance. Severus treated Harry like any other student, fairly but without warmth, demanding but not encouraging, professional but never personal. Harry understood the necessity, but it felt like living a lie, pretending that the most important relationship in his life was merely academic. The strain was beginning to show on both of them when the anonymous threat arrived. Harry found it slipped under his dormitory pillow one evening in late October, written in spidery handwriting that seemed designed to disguise the author's identity. We know where you really came from. We know about the little house in Spinner's End, about the man who stole you from your destiny. We know about the lies you've been living and the truth you've been hiding. You cannot remain hidden forever, or the Dark Lord's servants remember their failures, and they do not forgive. Watch your back, little Potter. Your pretend father cannot protect you here. Harry's hands shook as he read the message, and his first instinct was to run immediately to Severus. But something held him back. The realization that bringing this threat to his father's attention would only confirm the author's implicit message that Harry was still dependent, still in need of protection, still the frightened child who had been rescued from Godric's Hollow 14 years ago. Instead, Harry carefully folded the letter and placed it in his trunk, making a mental note to discuss it with Severus during their next private meeting. He was Harry Snape now, Gryffindor 5th year and capable young wizard. Whatever threats emerged from his past, he would face them as who he had chosen to be, not who others expected him to be. But as he settled into his bed, surrounded by the sleeping sounds of his roommates, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that his peaceful integration into Hogwarts life was about to become significantly more complicated. Outside the dormitory windows, the Scottish wind howled through the castle grounds, and somewhere in the darkness, forces that remembered the night Lily and James Potter died were beginning to stir. Chapter 12. The Family We Choose. The attack came during the last week of Harry's first year at Hogwarts, on a warm May evening when the grounds were filled with students enjoying the approaching end of term. Harry was walking back from the library with Neville and Luna, discussing their upcoming defense against the dark arts exam, when the first spell flew past his head and shattered the stone gargoyle beside the main entrance. "Down!" Harry shouted, his training with Severus taking over as he pushed his friends behind the massive oak doors. But even as he drew his wand, he knew this wasn't a random attack or a student prank gone wrong. The spells crackling through the air were dark, vicious, and cast with lethal intent. "Well, well," came a cold, aristocratic voice from the shadows beyond the castle steps. "Harry Potter, or should I say, Harry Snape? How touching that you've adopted the name of your kidnapper." Lucius Malfoy stepped into the light cast by the castle's torches, flanked by 3 other figures in dark robes and silver masks. Death Eaters, the ones who had avoided Azkaban, who had spent 14 years nursing their grievances and planning their revenge. "Lucius," Harry said calmly, surprising himself with his steady voice. At 15, he was nearly as tall as Severus now, and the years of advanced magical training had given him confidence in his abilities. "I'd say this is unexpected, but we both know you've been planning this for months." "Clever boy," Malfoy sneered. "Too clever for your own good, I'm afraid. Do you know what you cost us? What your survival meant for our cause?" Behind Harry, he could hear Neville whispering urgent instructions to Luna, probably telling her to run for help. But Harry knew help wouldn't arrive in time. These weren't amateurs. They had planned this attack carefully, probably neutralizing the castle's defenses and communication systems before revealing themselves. "I know what my survival meant to Severus Snape," Harry replied, raising his wand. "It meant everything. And if you think you're going to take that away from him, you're about to learn exactly how powerful chosen family can be." The magical explosion that followed Harry's words surprised everyone present, including Harry himself. His protective magic, refined by years of Severus's careful training and strengthened by the depth of their emotional bond, erupted outward in a wave of pure force that knocked all 4 Death Eaters backward and shattered every window on the first floor of the castle. But more than that, Harry realized with amazement, his magic was calling out, not just defensively, but actively seeking the one person who mattered most to him. "Dad?" Harry thought desperately, pouring his will into the magical connection he'd always shared with Severus. "I need you." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Harry felt Severus's magic answer his call, felt their bond flare to life with unprecedented intensity, felt the man who had raised him rushing toward danger without a moment's hesitation. "Severus," Harry whispered, and suddenly his father was there, apparating directly into the midst of the battle with his wand drawn and murder in his dark eyes. "You dare!" Severus snarled at Malfoy, his voice carrying a fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate with menace, "to threaten my son." What followed was unlike any magical combat Harry had ever witnessed. Severus and Harry moved in perfect synchronization, their spells flowing together as if choreographed, or their magical abilities complementing and amplifying each other in ways that seemed to transcend normal wizarding capabilities. When Severus cast a shield charm, Harry's magic reinforced it until it was strong enough to deflect unforgivable curses. When Harry conjured binding spells, Severus's power guided them with surgical precision that made escape impossible. When the Death Eaters tried to disapparate, the combined force of their magic created a containment field that trapped the attackers within the castle grounds. "Impossible!" breathed one of the masked figures. "No one should be able to—" His words were cut off as Harry's stunner, enhanced by Severus's magical signature, sent him flying backward to crash into the stone steps. The other Death Eaters were falling just as quickly, overwhelmed by the seamless cooperation between father and son. But it was Lucius Malfoy who provided the most dramatic conclusion to the battle. Desperate and cornered, he raised his wand toward Harry with clear intent to cast the killing curse, the same curse that had failed to claim Harry's life 15 years ago. "Avada," Malfoy began. He never finished the incantation. The protective magic that surged from both Harry and Severus was so powerful, so absolute in its rejection of any threat to their family, that Malfoy's wand simply disintegrated in his hand. The would-be curse backfired spectacularly, leaving the Death Eater unconscious and his magical abilities temporarily severed by the force of his own reflected dark magic. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of running footsteps as auras, teachers, and students rushed toward the scene of battle. But Harry only had eyes for Severus, who was looking at him with an expression of fierce pride and overwhelming relief. "Are you hurt?" Severus asked, his hands already moving in diagnostic gestures to check for injuries. "I'm fine," Harry assured him, then surprised them both by stepping forward and hugging his father tightly, not caring who was watching or what they might think. "We did it. Together." "Together," Severus agreed, his arms closing around Harry with the protective strength that had sheltered him for 15 years. When they finally separated, they found themselves surrounded by a crowd of witnesses that included Dumbledore, McGonagall, several Aurors, and what seemed like half the student body. But it was Dumbledore who spoke first, his blue eyes bright with something that might have been wonder. "Remarkable," the elderly wizard murmured. "Harry, the magic you and Severus just demonstrated, the synchronization, the power amplification, I've never seen anything quite like it." "It's what happens when people choose to be family," Harry said simply, his hand finding Severus's and squeezing gently. "We've been practicing together for 15 years. We know each other's magic as well as our own." "More than that," Dumbledore said thoughtfully. "What you've achieved transcends normal magical bonding. Severus, your unconventional approach to raising Harry has created something unprecedented. A magical partnership based on love and choice rather than blood or destiny." Around them, students and teachers were whispering in amazement. But Harry found he didn't care about their opinions anymore. Let them marvel at his unusual upbringing. Let them speculate about his relationship with Severus. He knew the truth, and so did the man who mattered most. As the Aurors led the captured Death Eaters away and the crowd began to disperse, Harry turned to face the assembled students and teachers. His voice carried clearly across the castle grounds. "I want everyone to understand something," he said. "My name is Harry Snape. Severus Snape is my father, not by accident of birth, but by choice, sacrifice, and 15 years of unconditional love. Whatever you think you know about how families should be formed, whatever expectations you have about blood and destiny, I want you to know that this man gave me something more valuable than fame or prophecy. He gave me a childhood filled with love, learning, and the knowledge that I was valued for who I am, not who others expected me to be." The silence that followed was profound, and when it broke, it was with applause, tentative at first, then growing stronger as students and teachers alike recognized the truth in Harry's words. Professor McGonagall stepped forward, her usually stern expression softened with emotion. "Mr. Snape," she said formally, "both of you have demonstrated today that family is indeed defined by love and choice rather than blood. Hogwarts is honored to have witnessed such an extraordinary bond." That night, as Harry sat in Severus's office, sharing a quiet cup of tea and processing the day's events, he reflected on how much had changed since his arrival at Hogwarts. The threats were neutralized, his identity was secure, and his relationship with Severus had been publicly acknowledged and celebrated. "Do you ever regret it?" Harry asked suddenly. "Taking me that night? Giving up your planned life for an unknown future?" Severus set down his teacup and looked at Harry with the same intense love he'd shown that first night in Spinner's End. "Never," he said firmly. "You are the best thing I've ever done with my life, Harry. Every sacrifice was worth it to see you become the remarkable young man you are today." 20 years later, Harry Snape stood in the garden of the renovated house at Spinner's End, watching his own children play among the herbs and flowers that Severus tended with the same careful attention he'd once devoted to Harry's education. "Grandpa Sev," called 5-year-old Lily Snape, Harry's daughter, as she ran toward the elderly man who was emerging from the greenhouse with fresh-cut roses. "Look what I made." Severus, now 55 and silver-haired, but still sharp-eyed and devoted to his family, knelt down to examine Lily's latest creation, a crown of woven grass and wild flowers that she'd made with the same careful attention to detail that seemed to run in their chosen family. "Beautiful work," Severus said solemnly, placing the crown on Lily's head with ceremony befitting royalty. "Your technique is improving remarkably. Harry's son James, now 7, and already showing signs of the same powerful magical abilities, that had defined Harry's childhood, looked up from the potion garden where he'd been helping arrange ingredients by magical property. "Grandpa Sev, can you tell us the story again? Was about how you and Dad fought the bad wizards together?" "Which time?" Severus asked with gentle humour. There were several occasions over the years. "The first time," Lily said eagerly, settling beside Severus on the garden bench. "When Dad was at the magic school, and the scary men tried to take him away." Harry, now 35, and one of the most respected healers at St. Mungo's, joined them in the garden, marvelling, as he always did, at the sight of his children with the man who had shaped his entire life. Severus had been right all those years ago. Family wasn't about blood or destiny or other people's expectations. It was about choice, love, and the daily decision to care for each other, no matter what challenges arose. "The story goes like this," Severus began, pulling both children close as Harry settled beside them on the bench. "What once upon a time, there was a little boy who needed a family, and a man who needed someone to love. They found each other on the darkest night of their lives, and they decided to build something beautiful together." As the sun set over Spinner's End, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Harry listened to Severus tell their story to the next generation. It wasn't a tale of prophecy or destiny or the triumph of good over evil. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was the story of two people who had chosen each other against all odds, who had built a family on love and determination, who had proven that the bonds we choose are often stronger than the ones we're born with. The house that had once been a place of misery and broken dreams was now filled with laughter, learning, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. And at the heart of it all was the truth that had guided them for over 30 years. That love, properly cultivated, could indeed conquer destiny. "And they lived happily ever after?" Lily asked as Severus finished the story. "They lived," Severus corrected gently, his dark eyes meeting Harry's over the children's heads. "Happily, gratefully, and surrounded by the family they chose to create, which is the very best kind of ever after there is." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harry reflected on the alchemy that had brought them all together, the mysterious transformation of grief into love, of isolation into belonging, of two broken people into a family that had grown to include children, friends, and a community of people who understood that the most powerful magic wasn't found in prophecies or destinies, but in the simple, daily choice to love and be loved in return. It was, he thought, the most successful magic either of them had ever performed. What if Petunia Dursley left Harry on the Weasleys' doorstep at age 3, and Molly raised him as her 8th child? What if the Sorting Hat refused to sort Harry until Dumbledore answered for what he had done to the boy? What if Hermione used a time-turner to go back to the night? Harry's parents died and found Dumbledore already there. Watching what if Minerva McGonagall quit Hogwarts at age 60 and raised Harry in a cottage in Scotland, far from Dumbledore's control? What if Sirius Black and Fleur Delacour arrived at the Dursleys on the same night, both determined to take Harry and never bring him back? What if Cedric Diggory survived the graveyard and testified that Dumbledore knew the tournament was a trap? What if Bill Weasley broke every ward Dumbledore had placed on Privet Drive and found dark magic that should never have been nearer? Child, what if Hermione found a locked room in Hogwarts that contained every child Dumbledore had sacrificed before? Harry, what if Severus Snape took Harry the night Lily died and raised him in Spinner's End without telling a soul? What if Victor Crumb offered Harry asylum in Bulgaria after the Triwizard Tournament and Hermione helped him escape? What if Harry walked out of Hogwarts in front of the entire school at age 12 and Snape was the one who held the door open? What if? Pansy Parkinson overheard Dumbledore's plan in the dungeons and warned Harry before it was too late. What if Lily Potter left a second letter hidden in Gringotts, and it named every person Dumbledore told her to trust? What if Amelia Bones launched a full investigation into Dumbledore? After Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire, what if the Hogwarts portraits came, brought alive during Harry's trial, and every former headmaster testified against Dumbledore? What if Neville Longbottom's grandmother Augusta demanded Harry be placed with her after she learned what the Dursleys had done? What if Draco Malfoy switched sides at age 13, after watching Dumbledore send Harry into the Chamber of Secrets alone? What if Arthur Weasley found Dumbledore's name on a ministry surveillance order for Harry, filed the day after Lily and James died? What if the Goblin Nation declared Harry a protected ward of Gringotts and told Dumbledore he had no authority over the Potter vaults? What if Kingsley Shacklebolt found Harry during a routine or a check on Privet Drive and reported the Dursleys to the Ministry? What if Remus Lupin found Lily's diary in the ruins of Godric's Hollow, and every entry was about Dumbledore's demands? What if Madame Pomfrey documented every injury Harry arrived with each September and handed the file to the Wizengamot? What if Blaise Zabini and Hermione Granger formed a secret alliance in third year to get Harry out of Dumbledore's grip? What if Neville Longbottom was the boy who lived instead, and Harry grew up free until Dumbledore came looking for him? At age 14, what if every Hogwarts student in Harry's year signed a petition against Dumbledore, and Luna Lovegood delivered it to the Daily Prophet? What if Fleur Delacour brought the French ministry's auras to Hogwarts after the third task and demanded Harry be released into her custody? What if Dobby smuggled Harry out of Privet Drive at age 6 and hid him in the Room of Requirement for 5 years before Hogwarts? What if Winky, the house elf, testified at the Wizengamot that Barty Crouch Sr. knew about Dumbledore's plan for Harry all along?